Chapter 11:19. For Captain Shao and the others, the mission was a bit sudden. They were also training in the army when they were suddenly told that a female soldier was undergoing special training and needed their cooperation to complete the assessment of the female soldier. Now, the female soldier was nowhere to be seen, not even a trace of her. Where were they going to find her? What if the female soldier got lost? The instructor in charge of Team A and Team B heard this and said to the captain of Team B, "We confirm that the female soldier has been moving in the direction given to you." The military leader said that this female soldier is not an ordinary female soldier. If you can't find her in 3 days, retreat. Moving in the direction given to them meant that they didn't find any traces left by the female soldier. All traces were erased by her. Captain Shao, who was about 1.72 meters tall, had a cold expression on his face. After ending the call with the military, he immediately led the team to chase after the female soldier. After Yi Qian realized that there was a group of unidentified people in front of him, he became more careful. Although he walked carefully, he didn't slow down. Walking along the woods on both sides of the stream, Yi Qian's military boots stepped on the wet moss. With a cold gaze, he acted like a real warrior, embarking on his own journey. Yi Qian's diet was cut off. He relied on all kinds of raw food to maintain his life. He walked until about 11 o'clock in the afternoon and stopped. On the computer screen where he could see her location signal, the red light that represented her was still flashing and didn't move forward. Stop about 1 kilometer away from Team A. The person who spoke was an unfamiliar young face. His facial features were handsome, and the lines were sharp and angular, as if they were carved by a master. There was a chill that kept people away from him. This was a man who had a completely different temperament from Xia Jinyuan. His skin was a healthy wheat color, and he wore a white Navy summer uniform. He sat in the Navy commander's office and stared at the flashing red dot in the same place. He was as cold as a glacier by the sea. There was no extra expression on his face. The Navy commander stood beside him and stared at the red dot in the same place. He asked, "Did she find something up ahead, or is she just resting in the same place?" "I'm not sure." The man didn't speak much. His muscular arms were crossed in front of his chest, and his unintentional movements had the sexiness of a soldier. She started Special Forces training at the age of 14. There are very few girls like her. Are you saying that she has already noticed the abnormality? The Navy commander picked up the document sent by the army and flipped to the last page. When he saw a line of training plans, the commander smiled and said, "This girl is indeed not simple. Jinyan, look here. She has trained by the sea." Jinyan, Li Jinyan, 26 years old, lieutenant commander, the captain of a certain naval commando team in the West Southern Sea, had been honored with first-class meritorious service many times and had even been honored with special-class meritorious service 3 times. Being exposed to the sun for so many years, he was not affected by the warmth of the sun. His entire face was as cold as a glacier, and he maintained the same expression all year round, no expression. He took the folder from the commander. His cold gaze fell on one of the items on Yi Qian's 4-year plan. The corners of his mouth twitched slightly, and he said flatly, "The records are vague. They can't be used for reference." Don't be so picky. Didn't you just say that you started Special Forces training at the age of 14? That's very little. The little girl shouldn't be too bad. Otherwise, the military wouldn't have placed such importance on her. The Navy commander knew his beloved general's temper. Everything he did had to be perfect, not only for himself, but also for the soldiers in his hands. Chapter 11:20. From July to August, he would lead the Frogman training team. They would conduct devilish underwater training on 4 islands near the Southwest Sea archipelago. The military had suddenly arranged for a female soldier who was likely to enter the Army Special Forces. The Navy also needed to be prepared and understand. Li Jinyan's cold face didn't change at all in the face of his commander's kind reminder. He glanced at the screen and saw that the red dots suddenly began to move. He only glanced at it once before his eyes fell on the 2-inch photo. The photo was a blue background. The girl in the photo was indeed a young girl. Her facial features were not bad and her skin was white. If he didn't see the tenacity between her eyebrows in the photo, he would have thought that she was the daughter of some high-ranking officer. He didn't know why, but looking at the photo, he felt that she was a little familiar. "Commander, don't agree to the military immediately. Hold it down for half a month." Li Jinyan didn't stay any longer. He put the folder on the desk and stood up. His 1.8-meter height had an astonishing aura, and the entire office felt stifling because of him. He glanced at the red dots circling the line. It seemed that she wasn't resting in place. She really did find something abnormal 1 kilometer away. Her observation and reconnaissance skills seemed to be quite good. However, women had always been more sensitive than men in this aspect, so there was nothing to praise. The Navy commander nodded. "You will lead the team for this training. If you think that the military's arrangement is unreasonable, I will explain the situation to the military and refuse her participation." "No need. The fact that the military said so means that they have this plan. Hold it down for half a month. I just want to see if the military will persist because of her." Li Jinyan put on his white military cap and adjusted the brim. He added, "The military is still persisting after half a month. This means that this female soldier does have some merit." If the military was still persisting after half a month, he didn't mind letting this female soldier experience some hardship. Training on the sea without touching the ground would take 4 years. If she wanted to join the frogman training immediately, she would have to see if she had the ability. The sun in the Southwest Sea was particularly bright. The entire beach shimmered with silver light. The southern province's Dalong Mountain was hot and humid during the day. After walking for 4 hours, Yi Qian resisted his thirst and quietly took a detour in the forest. There was someone in front of him, and it was very close to him. If he continued to walk in the same direction, he would bump into them head-on. As a Special Forces soldier who acted alone, he was most afraid of bumping into someone head-on. If he wanted to know who the other party was, what they were up to, and whether it was safe or not, he had to go around and observe. Sensing danger, Yi Qian arched his back like a cat as he passed through the forest that was so quiet that he could hear a pin drop. He quickly took a detour to seize a good vantage point so that he could see who was in front of him. She was 1 kilometer away from the ambush point, but when she made a detour, she appeared within the range of the scout's binoculars. However, she only appeared for a second, giving the scout no time to react. By the time he reacted, Yi Qian had already disappeared from his line of sight. He only saw the leaves rustling gently, but did not see anyone. Because the scout did not carry out a second round of reconnaissance, Yi Qian, who had unintentionally entered the scout's range, did not feel anything strange. Holding onto a tree branch with both hands, she leaped lightly and landed in a stone depression with its back to the sun. Chapter 11:21. It was normal for them not to discover the scout. Yi Qian was strong, and so was their army. This was also why Xia Jinyuan wanted her to train non-stop and add in actual combat training. Completing every training session successfully did not mean that you were already very strong and invincible, but that the deeper and more dangerous problems had yet to appear. The scouts of the Southern Province military region were well known throughout the military region for their strength. Although this scout missed the opportunity to see Yi Qian directly, he immediately put away his binoculars and jumped down from the tree when he saw the abnormal movement of the leaves. At 11:30 in the afternoon, the sun began to shine brightly. The soldiers of Team A, who were camouflaged in the leaves and behind the vines, quietly waited for the female soldier they needed to chase to appear. The scout ran to the camouflaged captain and said in a low voice, "Captain, the female soldier might have discovered our tracks. I saw the movement of leaves about 500 meters away from us, but I didn't see anyone. She didn't discover them the first time." The captain of Team A was a little surprised. Sometimes, the strength of the scouts and their team couldn't even take advantage of the military region, but this time, they only saw a shadow. "I didn't see anyone at all. By the time I discovered them, I only saw the abnormal movement of leaves. If it wasn't for the fact that there wasn't any wind just now, I might have thought that the movement was caused by the wind," the scout said truthfully. "We have to retreat, Captain. We can't stay here for long." They had to retreat. The pursuers had discovered them long ago. They were the ones who discovered the female soldier in advance. How could they be discovered by the female soldier? Signaler. Contact Team B and see where they are. After they gathered, the captain of Team A immediately asked the soldiers to contact Team B first. There were pursuers behind them, and there was an encirclement in front of them. With 14 men surrounding one female soldier, it was impossible for them to retreat within 3 days. Team B's situation was not much better than Team A's. After all, Yi Qian had been training for 4 years. Although she didn't have any military experience, she was naturally much stronger than the soldiers in the two teams who had only been in the army for 2 or 3 years. The soldiers sent by the provincial military were not bad, but Yi Qian was not bad either. It took Team B a long time to find 2 traces of her erasure. "She shouldn't be too far away from you. The female soldier we're chasing isn't an ordinary person. Old Ding, you have to be careful." "I've only found 2 traces of her," Captain Xiao said helplessly. He felt embarrassed to say it out loud. The instructor said that the female soldier we're chasing is a special forces soldier. Her training is 10 times harsher than ours. Old Ding, in terms of training, we're way behind the others. The soldiers that were sent out were not field troops. Other than daily drills and regular field training, they did not undergo any cruel training like Yi Qian. Although they had a lot of people, it was not easy to capture Yi Qian alive. The captains of the 2 teams were aware of this problem. They ended the call a little sullenly. Realizing that the female soldier they were chasing was not ordinary, the 2 teams moved even more carefully. An hour after Yi Qian discovered their tracks, she saw them pass by in front of her disguised as leaves. She instantly understood that not only did she not have any food to eat, she also had to be careful not to be caught by the soldiers who ambushed her. Knowing that the people who appeared in the forest were soldiers, Yi Qian felt a lot more at ease. There was no need to waste time looking for them. They only needed to stay away from them and not be discovered by them. Chapter 11:22. Yi Qian knew that she had to be more cautious if she wanted to avoid them. She didn't have time to erase her tracks, so she had to make sure she didn't leave any behind. She endured her hunger and didn't eat for the entire afternoon. Only then did she manage to distance herself from the soldiers. On the second day of the escape from death training, Yi Qian entered a period of continuous hunger. Grass roots were the only food she could eat along the way. After walking for 5 hours on the grass roots to replenish her energy, Yi Qian dug out 2 birds' nests and ate a total of 6 small, pigeon egg-sized bird eggs. For the entire day, she ate half a slice of raw snake meat in the morning, water from a stream at noon, grass roots in the afternoon, and 6 bird eggs in the evening. She wasn't as relaxed as she had been the day before. With the soldiers chasing after her, she had to be alert at all times to avoid being discovered. "The 3 of you, flank this side. The 2 of you, bring up the rear. You cut the path in front. Stone and I will attack. Keep your heads down. Team A, who had discovered Yi Qian's whereabouts once again, began to form a triangle to flank her, closing in on Yi Qian's resting spot. Team B, who had caught up, directly attacked. It seemed like they were deliberately alerting the enemy to startle Yi Qian and make her lose her composure. In the evening, the golden crow in the horizon fell into the sea of clouds. The last ray of light disappeared from the sky. Yi Qian, who had been resting against a tree, suddenly rushed down the steep mountain like an arrow released from a bow. She was so fast that the leaves brushed past her ears. She wasn't afraid that the leaves would stab her eyes or cut her skin. Fuck! When the soldiers who were still lurking saw her rushing down without a care for her life, they all tightened their backpacks and rushed down as well. Team Leader Xiao and Team Leader Ding followed the rustling sounds of leaves along the way and led their own soldiers to charge down without any regard for their lives. Flank, flank. 3 to the left and 3 to the right. The rest go straight in the middle. Before the 14 people had completely dispersed, Team D immediately deployed and said to Captain Xiao, "If we don't catch her tonight, it'll be difficult tomorrow." Yi Qian sensed that there were people approaching her and ran towards the route she needed to take tomorrow. Not only did she have to run, but she also had to run to a place where she could see more clearly and turn her head to look at the mountain under the night sky. Otherwise, how would she be able to draw the topographic map of her march? The military map that was given to her was not a city map that could be bought outside. It was a contour line formed by connecting various points. She wanted to draw a topographic map herself. She could only draw it by looking at it on the spot. It took her 27 minutes to run from the ridge to the saddle of Yi Qian between the two mountains. She had been running non-stop for nearly half an hour in her half-starved state. Yi Qian did not continue to run. She pulled away and quickly found a place to hide. With so many soldiers chasing after her, she had to secretly get rid of a few of them. There were still 5 days left. She did not want to run for her life in the forest at night. Although they could search for Yi Qian in a large area by flanking him from both sides, the fact that their forces were not concentrated also made it easier for Yi Qian to deal with them in secret. She had already found a row of cover. When she heard movement coming from nearby, she quietly got up and approached silently. "Don't move." When the soldier turned around, the dagger was pressed against his back. Her clear and cold voice reached the soldier's ears. "I've already taken care of you." She had already pressed a dagger against his vitals. How could she not take care of him? Yi Qian gestured for him to squat down. She laughed softly and said, "You can rest now, comrade." He did not want this kind of rest at all. Chapter 11:23. Yi Qian didn't even ask the soldier he had taken care of how many of them there were. His hand touched the soldier's backpack, then moved towards the soldier's waist. "Comrade, there are differences between men and women. You. What are you touching?" The soldier was young. When Yi Qian touched his waist, his face was full of embarrassment. He hurriedly said, "I don't have anything on me." "Why are you touching me?" Yi Qian was checking where the soldier kept his rifle and checking if there was a pistol at his waist. "I'm checking what's in your backpack and whether you have a gun on you." "I have a gun. They're all blanks. There's no live ammunition. I'm only wearing a pair of pants." "You. Be careful." The soldier was not only embarrassed, but also a little embarrassed. "I'll stay where I am. I won't expose your whereabouts, okay?" "Why? Why doesn't this female soldier have any self-awareness?" "He's a male soldier. Where's the gun?" "Other than the rifle, there's nothing else." Yi Qian touched the soldier's backpack because he didn't see him holding a gun. The soldier lowered his head and looked at the rifle at his feet. There's a Type 95 rifle under my feet. There are 10 blanks. There's no pistol. It turned out that when Yi Qian pressed the bayonet against the back of his neck, the soldier reacted quickly. He hid the rifle in his hands to prevent it from being confiscated. Other than military supplies, there was indeed no pistol in the backpack. After checking, Yi Qian picked up the rifle the soldier hid and laughed softly. "Comrade, I'm just doing a routine body search. It's not called touching. You're a man, so why are you afraid of being touched by a woman? Have a good rest." The word rest spun on the tip of her tongue. Someone was approaching her. Chirp, chirp, chirp. There was the sound of birds chirping, followed by the rustling of leaves. Someone whispered, "Fuck, I don't see anyone." The soldier who was squatting down closed his eyes. The female soldier who was standing behind him was now like a ghost moving closer to his comrade. Now, he had a comrade to keep him company. The sky was so dark that they could see the stars when they looked up, but the forest was so dark that they couldn't even see their own fingers. They didn't have night vision, and they couldn't get any light. The group of people felt their way in the dark and treaded carefully. Their bodies brushed past the tender green leaves, and there was a soft rustling sound. No one could see each other, and no one knew where they were. Yi Qian did not know who they were, but as long as she heard something, she would quietly go over to solve it. After taking down 2 of them in a row, the captains of Team A and B realized that something was wrong. They immediately slowed down and stopped searching. "I'm afraid Stone and Gwizzy have been taken care of. There's no movement. Don't move. Cover. Listen for any movement." He had hit 2 fish with his spear. The sound was as soft as a mosquito in the dark. No matter how good Yi Jian's hearing was, it was impossible for her to hear it. However, she had now caught the 3rd fish. "Don't move. I have a Type 95 bayonet in my hand. If you continue to struggle, you'll get stabbed." Yi Qian clamped the soldier's shoulder with one hand like a clamp. She used the blood groove of the bayonet to press against the soldier's neck. "If I really wanted to kill you, would you still have the chance to move? Lie down." The soldier really didn't move. The blood groove of the Type 95 bayonet was famous for its power. When the bayonet pierced into the body, the muscles would convulse due to the pain, causing the dagger to be unable to be pulled out instantly. Chapter 11:24. A Type 95 bayonet with a blood groove would draw out the blood and lubricate the friction between the blade and the muscles. It could quickly carry out a second attack. If the bayonet really did stab the male soldier, he would be offended. 14 soldiers took care of 3. Yi Qian didn't continue searching. Hearing that there was no movement around her, the corners of her mouth curled up slightly. Yi Qian, who only took 1 Type 95 rifle, quietly retreated in the direction she needed to go. She didn't know that there were soldiers chasing after her during the survival training. Uncle Chin also didn't remind her. It seemed that the military had something to do with it. The conversation with the Major General during the Spring Festival was still vivid in her mind. He said, "In the future, if there is a plan that you didn't plan for, it will definitely be related to the military. Don't make a fuss about it. Just focus on completing your training." Thus, a group of soldiers that suddenly appeared in front of her and soldiers chasing after her were part of the plan that the military added to her. Her plan was 7 days of survival training. Instead of staying behind to take care of the soldiers chasing after her, focus on completing your training. You can't be distracted. The wind in the mountains blew gently, causing the leaves to gently rustle. Yi Qian, who had always been clear about what she needed to do, didn't have the slightest bit of nostalgia for the thrill of battle. She left the valley where the soldiers were hiding. The flashing red light continued to move in the direction she needed to go. It didn't take long for her to move away from the 12 stationary red dots. Li Jinyan unbuttoned the top 2 buttons of his white navy uniform, revealing his wild collarbone. His expression was focused and cold as he stared at the flashing red dots. He didn't continue to fight. Within 5 minutes, he had taken care of 3 and left. This was getting interesting. There were 2 things that soldiers should avoid during training: being provoked and being distracted. Once these 2 things were violated, it meant that the soldier's emotions were volatile and easy to control. His judgment needed to be strengthened. If he were to objectively evaluate her, there would be 3 words: unqualified. It was interesting to say that she was a female soldier. Firstly, she was clear about what her training was. Secondly, she had taken care of the 3 soldiers as a warning. Thirdly, she knew the identity of the soldiers chasing after her. She didn't have to worry about the identity of the people chasing after her. She was calm, smart, and capable. Did the military really want to groom her? There were many calm, smart, and capable people in the army. It was only because she was a female soldier that the military paid more attention to her. Still observing. Did you see anything? The office door was pushed open, and the Navy commander walked in. I've mentioned it to the army and told them about the nature of our training this time. The army is very insistent. Before the commander walked over, Li Jinyan immediately buttoned up the 2 buttons he had undone. He stood up and turned around. At present, you do have some ability. You took care of 3 soldiers in 5 minutes. You have a clear goal and are relatively calm. According to what you said, it's not bad. The commander laughed. It was rare for him, a general, to praise a soldier. I can only say that she is a calm person. The commander smiled and shook his head. What should I say about you? You're too harsh, and you'll scare away potential soldiers. You have to give them a chance to adapt. You can't keep denying their abilities. Personally, I think that this female soldier Yi Qian is really outstanding. Her memory has reached an unfathomable level in the army. It's not an exaggeration to say that she has a photographic memory. It's already at an unimaginable level. Chapter 11:25. She can clearly repeat what happened a few months ago, what she said, and what others said. Such a powerful memory is indeed shocking. I was also shocked. As for Yi Jian, even though he had not met him yet, the Navy commander already admired him based on the information and his conversation with the Major General of the Army. She really has potential, I can see it. This female soldier, for the time being, I feel that she is outstanding. At 8:00 in the evening, the sky over the Southwest Sea had just begun to fade. Li Jinyan took out a list of names from his desk and handed it to the Navy commander. Take a look at this list. I won't deny soldiers with potential. After the basic training, there will be a ranking. Those who are not qualified will be eliminated. Those who are qualified will enter the 2nd step of training. When he spoke, his facial muscles did not move. When he spoke in a cold tone, it seemed that even the temperature in the room dropped a lot. The pure white Type 97 Navy uniform was supported by his perfect and sexy figure to the edges and corners without a wrinkle. Not only did it show the majesty of the Navy, it also showed an indescribable sense of abstinence. The Navy commander opened the roster. The details of every soldier were clearly written down. Their strengths, weaknesses, potential, and so on were all clearly written down. He had always been at ease with Li Jinyan's work. Basic training in June, devil training in July to August. As for the Army's work, we will do our best to cooperate. Whether it is good or not, we will send them to you for inspection. After inspection, you will know. Yes. Li Jinyan did not say more. He was a soldier who was not good with words. If the army insisted, he would of course accept. As for the arrangements and training after acceptance, it was not up to the army to intervene. The long sound of the warship's horn came from the sea. The Navy wearing dark blue training uniforms gathered and ended the day's routine training. The sentinel holding a steel gun on the dock changed shifts with the next sentinel. In the bloody setting sun, the two sentinels' figures were straight. The sentinel who took the steel gun saluted his comrade and began his shift. White uniforms, black reefs, half of the sky was dark blue, and the other half was blood red. There were warships docked in the distance, and a few rows of Navy soldiers walked towards the barracks in neat steps, outlining the daily life of the naval barracks. Seagulls flew across the surface of the sea, bringing with them a cheerful chirp. On an unknown island, several frogmen carrying heavy oxygen tanks emerged from the depths of the sea. They made an okay gesture to their comrades, and like a shark, they swam to the shore with a strength that could split the sea. How many haven't come up yet? Speed, speed, speed. With Demon King Li's appearance, they would all dive for another 20 minutes. A pulmonary edema appeared. Today, I'll have to dive 40 meters. Tomorrow, I'll have to dive 60 meters. I'll have to see how far Demon King Li can dive. You talk too much. Take off your equipment, damn it. I've been carrying dozens of kilograms for a whole day. My spine is about to break. The soldiers in the Navy's Storm Commandos were both frogmen and divers. They trained for an average of 8 hours a day, and about 4 to 5 hours would be spent training underwater. Li Jinyan was the captain of the Storm Commandos. Because of the harsh training and his cold personality, the soldiers who had just passed the selection secretly called him Demon King Li. However, the official members of the Storm Commandos were absolutely respectful to their captain, and their words were full of admiration. Chapter 11:26. The 4 official members of the Storm Commandos smirked coldly as they listened to the dozens of soldiers who had just passed the preliminary selection grumbling as they came out of the water. They waited quietly for the dozens of soldiers who still wanted to see their captain take off their diving gear. The salty sea breeze blew, and the waves began to push forward from the gentle waves to the reefs. After the soldiers took off their heavy diving suits, the 4 official members popped out from the corners of the reefs and stood in front of the 40 soldiers. They shouted, "Line up!" A new round of night training began. Yi Qian looked up at the starry sky and rubbed her starving stomach. She let out a long sigh. No matter how miserable she was in her previous life, 3 meals a day was considered normal. This time, she was starving. She carefully took out the 4 little bird eggs from her backpack. She squeezed the crispy eggshell with both hands, and the egg white flowed into her mouth. Dinner, just a few eggs. It seemed like she had to save some for tomorrow. She could not throw away the snake meat anymore. She had to wrap it with tree leaves to replenish her protein. The 2 teams sent by the provincial military were still searching. She had already climbed up a pine tree to think about tomorrow's food problem. The owl let out a strange cry, flew up from the tree, and landed lightly on another tree. The pheasants in the mountains cooed, and then slowly quieted down. The second day of training ended with the arrival of the 3rd morning. A thin mist rose in the forest. After a simple disguise, Yi Qian did not rush forward recklessly like she did the first day. She had to be careful of the soldiers behind her, but it was also possible that they would catch up to her after she slept for a night. Every day, she had to go to a designated location to send her location. If the soldiers chasing her knew the location she had to go to every day, it was entirely possible for them to hide there and wait for her to bump into them. Yi Qian, who was picking non-poisonous mushrooms in the pine forest, bent down, maintained her posture, ready to cover herself if she sensed anything strange. Yi Qian, who dealt with mushrooms for breakfast, did not stay in one place. She did not leave any trace for the soldiers to find her. It was as if she had disappeared into thin air, leaving no trace behind. Captain Xiao and Team D led their soldiers towards Yi Qian's destination. Last night, they knew that she had silently taken care of 3 soldiers by reaching behind their backs and pressing a bayonet against the back of their necks. Just hearing about it made them feel lucky that they had met this female soldier last night and not someone else. The 3 soldiers who had been taken care of the soldiers were waiting in place. They led the other soldiers and rushed through the night. The group of 11 people completely overtook Yi Qian. They did not wait at Yi Qian's first destination during the day. They waited at the location. The sun rose from the horizon to the west. The 11 soldiers who had rested were standing guard in a large circle. Tonight was their last chance. If they couldn't capture the female soldier alive, they would have to go back with their tails between their legs. At this moment, Captain Xiao and Captain D both felt that they had taken on a tricky task. Scouts, watch carefully. Report to us immediately if the leaves move. Be careful of the gun in her hand. Thinking of the rifle she had taken, Captain Xiao, who had spoken, rubbed his forehead. He had given the weapon to the other party. He should not have alerted her last night. Captain Xiao was not the only one with a headache. Team D was also having a headache. The female soldier had extremely strong anti-reconnaissance abilities. One of the scouts in his team had been killed last night. He even suspected that she had intentionally killed the scout in his team. Chapter 11:27. Team D felt a chill run down his spine at the thought of being able to kill his own scout in the dark. Old Ding, I have a hunch that we'll have to go back empty-handed. Captain Xiao felt this way. He couldn't say it to the soldiers, so he could only say it to his brother, who was also a captain. Team D's sigh came from the quiet leaves. There's a sense of suffocation in it. Today, we're chasing a female soldier. Tomorrow, we'll be chasing a criminal. We'll see our strength in a single chase. We still have to train hard. Although we know that the person we're chasing is a Special Forces soldier and that his strength is indeed above ours, it's very uncomfortable to think about it. From here, the difference between local troops, field troops, and Special Operations Forces could be seen. Field troops, especially the A Group Army, were responsible for the main combat missions and cross-regional combat missions. As long as there was a war, they could immediately send troops to fight. Local troops were responsible for auxiliary operations, company defense, city security, and other tasks. Generally, they would not cross the region to fight. One was responsible for combat, and the other was responsible for auxiliary operations. In terms of equipment, personnel, training level, and command level, the former was obviously stronger than the latter. The Special Forces were a force that could form an army by themselves. Special Forces with excellent individual combat skills could sometimes secretly kill a company or even a battalion. Team D and Captain Xiao belonged to the second-line forces, which was the local forces. The Major General sent a local force that even the field troops couldn't beat to capture a Special Forces soldier. In fact, he didn't have any hope in his heart. He just wanted the Navy to see how she would deal with the sudden appearance of the plan. Team D and Captain Xiao didn't know what the Major General's purpose was. They only knew that they were facing a difficult problem and a mission that made them feel very suffocated. After Team D finished speaking, he fell silent. His face was a little dignified. They were all soldiers and wore the same military uniform, but the difference in strength made them feel ashamed. Let's not talk about it. We've done our best. Captain Xiao wiped his face and looked away. He said softly, fortunately, the scouts in our military region are not bad. They didn't embarrass our military region. There was a little comfort in his heart. Every year, a group of scouts in the southern province's military region would be selected to join the field troops, and the auto soldiers in Fujian town were responsible for the security of Zhongnanhai. These two strengths were famous in the military regions of the province. They had the strength, but it was a pity that they didn't need the auto soldiers for this mission. They still did not know that Yi Qian had joined the Southern Province Automobile Company to study for 2 years. If they knew, they would feel even worse. A female soldier was stronger than them in every aspect. How could they not feel uncomfortable? Tired birds began to return to their nests. After a day of exposure to the sun, the little insects in the forest began to move in the evening. The high-pitched and low-pitched chirps of the insects ushered in a slender figure moving forward in the thick leaves. The female soldiers that gave the local troops a headache had appeared. This time, Li Jinyan saw the red dots representing the female soldiers quickly and accurately approaching the stationary green dots representing the local soldiers on the screen. His cold expression finally loosened a little. She seemed to know where the soldiers were hiding. Once she made a move, she would destroy a green dot. Intuition. It couldn't just be intuition. Observation skills. The female soldier had amazing observation skills and was quite skilled. Seeing the green dots disappear one by one, Demon King Li, whose expression never changed, narrowed his eyes slightly. Chapter 11:28. Yi Jian did not know that his position was exposed under the eyes of others. He clasped a soldier's arm with both hands, placed the soldier's rifle on his shoulder, and pushed him into the foliage. Another soldier was killed. Since the intensive training started in October of high school, there were only a few days left before the college entrance examination. Yi Jian had gone through so much cruel training. If she couldn't even deal with a few local soldiers at once, Headmaster Qin would definitely be the most disappointed. 10 in total. That's all. Yi Qian, who had finished off the soldiers quickly, smiled and pulled up a soldier. He apologized, "Sorry, I was a little harsh." "Are you hurt?" Even if he was hurt, he couldn't say it out loud. 10 in total. The number wasn't right. 11 in total. Who else hadn't been caught by her? Old Ding. It was possible. He was probably the only one left. Bro, hang in there. You're everyone's hope. Looking at the female soldier in front of him, he couldn't see her clearly. Captain Xiao loosened his shoulder, which was numb from being hit by the rifle butt. He endured the pain and said, "No, the number isn't right." It really hurt. She was more than just a little harsh. Too harsh. Tomorrow, his shoulder would definitely be bruised. Muscle contusion. The number wasn't right. There were still people hiding. An individual was a small target and a large area. It was a waste of time to look for them. He might as well learn from them and wait for them to come to him. They didn't have night vision goggles. If they wanted to ambush them, they could only fight in close combat. Yi Qian didn't bother hiding. He used his voice to lure the soldiers out. She heard the male soldier gasp in pain. She was a little embarrassed and said, "Are you okay? Do you want me to spray some medicine?" Although she knew it was inevitable, she couldn't help but blame herself for hurting his heart. It was fine if she used her hand, but she used the rifle butt. With her strength, she could have hurt the soldier. Although he couldn't deal with the injury in front of the female soldier, it was already very embarrassing. If it happened again, he couldn't afford to lose face. Captain Xiao didn't loosen his shoulder. He smiled and said, "It's okay, it's okay. I have to thank you for being merciful. You didn't fire a blank bullet, and you didn't hit me in the head with the rifle butt." Given the distance just now, the female soldier could have attacked even more ruthlessly. However, she probably had scruples about their identities and restrained her attacks. Hidden in the depths, Team D listened to the female soldier and old Zhao's soft conversation. Slowly, he held his breath and moved closer to her. All 10 of his brothers had been taken care of, and he was the only one left. He had to give it his all. The boots were very light, and the closer they got, the slower and steadier their movements became. The female soldier laughed and replied to old Zhao, "It's not good to shoot blanks in the middle of the night. If you shoot blanks at close range, you'll be able to leave a small dent in your body." Closer, closer, the soldiers are getting closer and closer, right now. That's why I have to thank you. Captain Zhao's entire sentence was cut off. He felt a strong gust of wind blow against his face. The female soldier, who had been able to see a black shadow, suddenly turned around. Only then did he realize that another black shadow was approaching. Old Ding, it was definitely him. Yi Qian's quick reaction really gave Team D a fright. The unprepared female soldier suddenly turned around and pounced at him like a ferocious beast. Her swift and fierce posture was mixed with hostility. She was fast and ferocious, and he had a hard time dodging her. This was the first time Yi Qian had fought against a local soldier. With his previous experience, he relaxed a little this time. He buckled the rifle in Team D's hand. The first step was to remove the magazine. The second step was to twist the entire rifle so that Team D had no choice but to let go. The third step was to fight without restraint. Chapter 11:29. To Yi Qian, jungle combat was no different from normal combat. To put it simply, it was like fighting flat ground. Her lower body was extremely stable. Her military boots stepped on the uneven mountainous ground as if her feet were rooted to the ground. She did not allow her body to sway in the slightest. When she lifted her foot and swept it across, the wind from her foot swept away the leaves directly. It was clear how strong her foot was. When they first met, Team 4 was immediately suppressed by Yi Qian's aura. His entire body was swept by Yi Qian until he couldn't stand still. His hands grasped the branches and leaves as he struggled, his palms burning with pain. "Old Ding, hold on." In the darkness, Captain Zhao held on to his last glimmer of hope and cheered for his brother. He just didn't know if he could hold on. Team 4 smiled bitterly. He also wanted to hold on, but he couldn't. His attack was quite fierce and carried a murderous aura. The entire mountainous area was uneven, and he didn't even have a place to stand firmly. The leaves around him rustled as he moved, and his movements were very loud. He was also in a very sorry state. The soldiers who had been defeated by Yi Qian stood together silently. When they heard the sounds coming from the darkness, they couldn't help but clench their fists and cheer for their captain. Among the 14 people, Team 4 and Captain Zhao were the best fighters. Team 4 was better than Captain Zhao, but even so, he couldn't withstand Yi Qian's attacks. He took the initiative to punch a few times, but in the end, he was mercilessly suppressed by Yi Qian. Too strong. They were no match for her at all. When local soldiers faced a special forces soldier, they would only be defeated. Even if the opponent was a female soldier, he didn't have a chance of winning. Yi Qian consecutively defeated 10 soldiers at the front and knew that their skills were far inferior to the field forces. She also slightly controlled her strength to avoid accidentally injuring them again. After forcing Team 4 to the middle of 2 trees, Yi Qian let out a low growl. Her long, slender legs pressed down like Mount Tai. Team 4, who had no way out, relied on his instincts. He hurriedly protected his head with his hands and blocked Yi Qian's right leg that pressed down on him. He couldn't help but bend his knees under the pressure of her foot. It was as if he was holding a jack with both hands, suppressing him to the point that he couldn't push her away no matter how hard he tried. 1 minute later, Yi Qian retracted his foot and said with a smile, "Tonight, the 11th one. There shouldn't be any more." There was no need for any more gestures. Team D knew that he had been dealt with. He was directly suppressed to the point where he couldn't move for a minute, defeated. As Team D spoke, the other 10 people all let out a soft sigh of relief. Gone, all gone. At 8:30 p.m. on the third day, the 14 local soldiers sent by the provincial military were completely annihilated. None of them survived. 11 tonight, plus the 3 from last night, all 14 soldiers have been dealt with. Even if they lost, they couldn't lose their composure. Team D said generously, with the honesty of a soldier. Very impressive. We accept our defeat wholeheartedly. We received orders to capture a female soldier alive within 3 days. There are only a few hours left before the end of the 3 days. Our mission has ended in failure. He hadn't guessed wrongly. The military was indeed involved. Would there be additional training from the military from time to time in the future? She didn't know. Uncle Chen didn't know either. They had discovered it midway. In the next few days, would there be more? There was still one thing that was unclear about the additional training this time. Why would the military send local troops to train them? Chapter 11:30. The lights were turned on. Led by Team D, the soldiers stood in a row in the foliage. Yi Qian shook hands with them one by one and smiled. "Thank you for your hard work. Please forgive me." Her face was covered in a thick layer of paint. Even with the light shining on her face, her facial features could not be seen. Only her bright eyes could be seen. They were as bright as the stars in the sky, and there was a hint of coldness in them. But everyone only had one thought in mind: so small. How could the female soldier who defeated them be so small? So small. "She's not even as big as me," the youngest soldier in the team muttered softly. Yi Qian pretended not to hear and said politely to Team D and Team Xiao, "I'm not sure why you guys are in this training. Please forgive me if I offended you in any way." The military had its reasons for this arrangement, but they couldn't figure out why it was done this way. It didn't make sense for a local soldier to go up against a special forces soldier. "I feel like you've taught us a lesson. When we get back, we'll have to reflect on ourselves. Although we're a local soldier and aren't as strong as a field soldier or a special force soldier, we still have 14 people. We're ashamed that we were beaten to a pulp." Team Xiao smiled bitterly. He didn't look like he was running away from the defeat. "Thank you for your hard work tonight." The strongest female soldier. The tense process ended politely. Yi Qian stood in place and watched them leave until he couldn't hear their footsteps anymore. Yi Qian rubbed his stomach and found the spot he wanted to sleep in. He waited for the sun to rise on the 4th day. When Yi Qian woke up this time, he spent some time covering the traces of the fight. The area was too big. Some of the bushes were trampled on, so it was impossible to wipe away all the traces. It took 10 minutes for Yi Qian to reach the place he needed to reach on the 4th day. From the 4th day to the 7th day, he didn't encounter any more ambushes. Yi Qian, who was so hungry that his skin was abnormally pale, relied on snake meat, insects, rats, tree bark, grass roots, and stone crabs to survive. Finally, at 3:00 in the afternoon of the 7th day, he appeared in the area of the Anti-Chemical Regiment's military zone. During the Escape from Death training, Yi Qian didn't miss a single signal for help. She didn't make a single call. With her amazing perseverance, she managed to survive. When she appeared, she was even one step ahead of Principal Chen. She smiled and said, "Uncle Chen, I'm out." It was normal to not have a meal for 7 days. There was no cooked food or warm water. She had to rely on food that ordinary people could not eat to survive. Looking at Yi Jian, who had lost so much weight in just 7 days, the corners of the iron-willed man's eyes turned red. Yi Jian had lost weight. She was wearing a jungle camouflage outfit. She was so skinny that her small face could be covered by a palm. The backpack on her back looked like a mountain, as if it could crush her at any time. However, her spirit was not damaged at all. She exuded a tough and indomitable aura. Standing in the sunlight, he was not crushed by hunger. He had the sword will of a pine tree that pierced through the clouds. He exuded the might of a soldier from head to toe. It's good that you're out. It's good that you're out. You're good at enduring. You'll have a bright future. Principal Chen patted Yi Qian's shoulder. His usually cold voice sounded a little choked up. The girl Jian didn't rely on anyone to get to where she was today. She relied on herself, one step at a time. Even if she had a close relationship with Major Xia, she didn't think of relying on anyone. She always remembered what Uncle Zhen told her: it's better to rely on yourself than on others. She relied on her own strength to gain the appreciation of the higher-ups in the military. Chapter 1131. Yi Qian, who was almost as thin as a match, smiled. Her eyes were as bright as the sun, emitting a dazzling radiance. She said, "Let's go home, Uncle Chin." She was really hungry, but her hungry stomach seemed to be blocked. Her mouth wanted to eat, and her body wanted to eat, but her stomach refused. You have to eat porridge. It's easy to digest porridge to recover your stomach's energy. You don't have to participate in training for the next week. Let your stomach recover first. Principal Chin reminded her with a smile. The two figures walked further and further away under the sunlight. On the road of the military, Yi Jian had overcome difficulties beyond her age by not giving in again and again, relying on her own courage and perseverance to move forward. While other students were still sitting in the classroom working hard for their studies, she had already found her own path and walked down it without complaint or regret. It took more than 2 hours to return to the city from the anti-chemical regiment. Yi Qian didn't go back immediately. First, she went to the anti-chemical regiment's infirmary for a simple examination. Then, she drank a bowl of plain porridge. Faced with the regiment commander and the political commissar's searchlight-like inspection, Yi Qian put down the empty bowl and smiled. If you really get used to it, it won't be a big deal in the future. Before the ancient humans found the fire seed, they also ate raw food. I feel that these few days I've been returning to the basics. A girl who had starved for 7 days straight, and then used the phrase, returning to the basics, to summarize the hunger survival training of escaping death. Her heart was really big. Since the first day I saw you during the military training, I knew you weren't simple. It's only been 2 years, but you've already come so far. You're even better than the soldiers in our regiment who spent 2 years as soldiers. Yi Qian, you're really something. The political commissar couldn't help but sigh with emotion. He remembered that year when she appeared in a formal camouflage uniform with a sharpness as sharp as a sword and completed a series of military postures with the instructors, winning cheers and applause. At that time, she was still young and inexperienced, and her eyebrows were still slightly immature. But now, even though she was sitting down, she had a military prestige that couldn't be ignored. It was the first time he had seen such a young girl who could cultivate to this level in the 10 years he had been in the army. Yi Qian had always been able to remain calm in the face of other people's praise. He would not become arrogant because of it. He smiled politely and said, "Because I like her, that's why I'm pursuing her. I've never easily given up on something I like. Joining the army has always been my dream. Wearing a military uniform is my goal, and I've never given up all these years." What's important is perseverance. What's important is perseverance. Your perseverance over the years is commendable. It's worth learning from all of us. The regiment commander had a deep impression of Yi Qian. Yesterday, his old partner had come to his office mysteriously and told him that there was a girl who had once made him want to stay in the anti-chemical regiment. He immediately thought of Yi Qian from the province's number 1 middle school. He reported the names he had guessed correctly. His old partner asked him in surprise, "How did you know? Did the higher-ups inform you in advance?" After sending away so many students for military training in the past 2 years, the only student that his old partner still remembered was Yi Qian from number 1 middle school. The little girl was indeed amazing. Among the students, she was the only one who left a deep impression on him. When he saw her again after 2 years, her military aura was even stronger, and she was also becoming more and more outstanding. He really wanted to snatch her into the anti-chemical regiment. "Student Yi, do you have any intention of joining the army? Why don't I have a chat with the political commissar and you can come and take a look?" The regiment commander of the anti-chemical regiment had transformed into Grandmother Wolf. He smiled like a gentle breeze and said amiably, "Take our anti-chemical regiment for example. Biochemical weapons will definitely fascinate you. Our anti-chemical regiment." Chapter 1132. He said that he wanted to have a chat with Yi Qian for reference, but in the end, the entire conversation revolved around the anti-chemical regiment. There are various squads below, such as the decontamination squad, the fire squad, the smoke squad, the observation squad, and the reconnaissance squad. You can go to whichever squad you want. Also, we are completely different from the local troops. Once the war starts, the anti-chemical regiment will be responsible for the anti-chemical regiment of the participating troops. We have to deal with harmful chemicals, monitor them, and take precautions. Although we don't have to fight the enemy head-on, we have always been fighting the enemy secretly. Student Yi, you can still fight the enemy if you join the anti-chemical regiment. What do you think? Our anti-chemical regiment is pretty good, right? The regiment commander was never good at chatting and heart-to-heart talk, but every word he said was the truth. The political commissar nodded along the whole time, explaining the specific tasks of each squad from time to time. He looked like he couldn't wait to drag Yi Qian through a physical examination, then quickly pass the background check and be assigned to the anti-chemical regiment as soon as possible. After resting for 2 hours in the anti-chemical regiment, Yi Qian chatted with the regiment commander and the political commissar for 2 hours. After she left, the regiment commander said bitterly to the political commissar, "Even a bowl of porridge couldn't keep her. The little girl is much more slippery than before. She didn't reject you directly. That's already giving you face." The political commissar drank some water and sighed with a smile. "Look at her training. She walked out without eating for 7 days. Tell me, what other troops need this kind of training? My old partner, only the special forces would train without eating for 7 days. Her ambition wasn't in this, so she couldn't be kept even if she wanted to." The regiment commander looked at the political commissar, and the political commissar looked at the regiment commander. Then, they sighed in tacit understanding, waved their hands, and went on to do what they were supposed to do. With the goal of becoming a special forces soldier, the anti-chemical regiment really couldn't keep her. Yi Qian, who was remembered everywhere she went, was sweating when she left. She wasn't good at chatting, and it was difficult for her to handle the enthusiasm of the 2 leaders in the regiment. Fortunately, they let her go in the end and talked about other things. Principal Chen, who was sitting in the front passenger seat, laughed loudly. "It's a good sign. It means that your ability has been recognized by the leaders and they think that you are worth training. The army is a big family, and the leaders all welcome capable and hard-working soldiers to join some special positions." Your performance and ability have shown them unlimited potential, so it's normal for them to want to poach you. Don't feel pressured. Work hard and move forward in the direction you've decided on. Listening to Principal Chen's voice, Yi Qian, who had eaten a bowl of porridge, felt her eyelids grow heavy as the jeep drove along. Coupled with the environment, she felt completely relaxed. Unknowingly, she fell asleep with a smile on her face. The car drove for more than 2 hours, all the way to the residential area at the back of the provincial No. 1 middle school. Even after the soldier parked the car, Yi Qian, who was sleeping in the back, did not wake up. Principal Chen saw the dark circles under her eyes and said to the soldier who sent them back, "Please help me carry her. She's too tired. Let her sleep for a while." "Yes, sir." The soldier opened the back door without hesitation. Just as he was about to bend down to carry Yi Qian out, a faint smile came from behind him. "Let me do it. You help sir carry his backpack." He had waited for more than an hour for his little fox to come back. It was better for the boyfriend to carry her upstairs. Chapter 1133. Principal Chen was taking his backpack from the trunk when he heard Xia Jinyuan's voice. He quickly turned around and saw Xia Jinyuan bending over to get into the car. He waved at the soldier who had yet to react. "Come, Xiaoding. Help me open the door." "Thank you." Inside the car, Xia Jinyuan's right hand was about to reach for the back of Yi Qian's neck so that he could hug her shoulders. However, with just one movement, Yi Qian, who was sleeping soundly in her seat, suddenly opened her eyes. She squinted her eyes in the dim light and said tiredly, "You're here." She was startled awake, but when she saw who it was, she quickly closed her eyes and ignored him. Xia Jinyuan looked at the thin face that had fallen asleep again in less than a second. His thin lips slightly tightened. The 7 days of escape from death training had made her lose a lot of weight, and it could be seen from her face. The dark circles under her eyes were very deep, and the corners of her eyes were greenish-black. Her lips, which were originally as delicate as peach blossoms, were now covered with a layer of pale skin. They were so dry that there were small cracks on them. From head to toe, she was completely exhausted. As he carried her out of the car, his elegant brows furrowed tightly. Thin. She wasn't just thin. She had lost a lot of weight, and in his arms, she looked a little bony. "Principal Chen, I'll carry her up first." Xia Jinyuan carried Yi Qian, who was so light that she didn't seem to weigh much. Deep in his dark eyes, there was an unresolvable heartache. He had never accompanied her during her training. Every time, he could only calculate the date of her return and rush over just to see if she was all right. In the face of high-intensity training, it wasn't that he didn't think that he could relax a little. However, whenever he thought of the cruelty of the battlefield, he would always suppress his heartache. When Case 7 was captured, his body was injected with an unknown drug that increased his pain. After returning to the country, he rested for 3 whole months. Even male soldiers suffered inhumane treatment, let alone female soldiers. No matter how much his heart ached, he had to endure it. At this time, it was already the time when the food in every household was fragrant and the city was brightly lit. Xia Jinyuan gently placed her on the soft bed and gently took off her coat. He then took off her muddy military boots and placed them on the balcony. When Principal Chen came in, he saw Yi Qian sleeping under a thin blanket. Then he saw the tall figure busy on the balcony. He smiled gently and closed the door. Major Xia really cared about Jian Yiling. Every time Jian Yiling finished her physical training, she would rush over to accompany her. She would also guide her emotions and seriously point out her shortcomings. With such a person taking care of Jian Yiling, he and Uncle Zhen were not worried at all. Outside, all the houses were brightly lit. However, Yi Qian's room had the curtains drawn. There wasn't a trace of light coming in, and there wasn't a trace of sound. Only 2 long breaths could be heard in the darkness. Xia Jinyuan set off from the grassroots company in the middle of the night. Halfway through the journey, the car encountered a landslide that blocked the only road from the grassroots company to the city. He asked the soldier to turn around and drive back to the company. He carried his luggage and climbed over the dangerous landslide with his bare hands. He walked more than 40 kilometers overnight to the city. From the time he set off last night until he arrived at the provincial capital around 6 p.m., he didn't stop for even a minute. He drove the car that Xia Yiwei prepared for him to the school. Finally, at 7:20 p.m., Yi Qian came back. The two of them were in a race against time. In the end, they were finally able to lie on the same bed and rest. To Xia Jinyuan and Yi Qian, this could be considered as dating. Chapter 1134. There wasn't much time for the two of them to squander, and there wasn't much time for them to enjoy each other's company. Every minute and second was particularly precious to them, because they didn't know if the person beside them would go on a long journey in the next second. The only thing they could do was to seize the time they had to spend together and enjoy the rare time together. It was also rare for them to sleep together. Yi Qian slept until 2:00 in the morning. As soon as she moved slightly, Xia Jinyuan, who was lying next to her, immediately opened his eyes. Having just woken up, he asked in a clear and hoarse voice, "Hungry?" "I heated up some porridge in the kitchen. Do you want to get up and eat?" With her head still resting on his strong arm, Yi Qian, who was infatuated with his body temperature, rubbed her head against his arm and said in a dry voice, "I'm not just hungry. I'm so hungry that I want to eat fatty meat. Principal Chin told me to eat porridge for a week to nourish my stomach." Her words made Xia Jinyuan chuckle. He tightened his arms around her and hugged her tightly. He laughed until his chest shook as he said, "You can't eat that. Listen to Uncle Chin and nourish your stomach for a week." After saying that, he took a deep breath in the crook of her neck and laughed a little louder. "I think we should take a good bath together. I haven't taken a bath for 3 days and 2 nights. You probably haven't taken one for a week." Girls were usually shy when it came to such topics, and Yi Qian was the type who was very, very shy. Hearing this, she immediately got up from his arms and rushed to the bathroom in the room like a gust of wind. Hearing the sound of water rushing out of the bathroom, Xia Jinyuan laughed out loud. He didn't tease her any further. Maintaining his gentlemanly demeanor, Xia Jinyuan went downstairs to the car to get his luggage. After he scooped a bowl of porridge from the kitchen and put it on the dining table to cool, he saw Yi Qian, whose hair was still wet, walk out in a workout shirt and shorts. Because she had just showered, her fair skin glowed like a pearl under the light, but it was a little too thin. Yi Qian's face was no longer red. He had walked alone in the forest for 7 days and was starving the entire time. How could he have had time to clean up his image? At most, he would have used a towel to wipe his face, but there shouldn't have been any smell. In front of him, the 18-year-old Yi Qian was less restrained. At the time, he was shy, but after that, he was able to keep his composure. Faced with his gaze, Yi Qian calmly. "But even my old madam would give her a thumbs up after tasting her cooking. It's just that she rarely cooks. Even Ho Zi has only eaten her cooking twice." Culinary skills required talent, and Xia Yiwei was talented. She often said to Xia Lingyuan, "After I retire, I'll open a Chinese restaurant in France. I'll let them know that Chinese food is profound." Yi Qian sat in the dining chair he pulled out and joked, "Zigu has only eaten twice. What about you?" The white porridge was sparkling and looked very appetizing. She took a spoonful as she spoke. I've eaten more. When I was in Fujian town, I went to see her whenever I had time. I ate dozens of times more than Hosea. Xia Jinyuan watched as she drank the porridge he made. He stood beside her and waited for Yi Qian to say a few words. For example, the porridge is good. It's delicious. Or, I want to eat more tomorrow. In short, as long as it was a compliment, it would be fine. Chapter 1135. It couldn't be helped. Every man wanted to show off in front of his girlfriend, and he was no exception. She and Xia Jinyuan were the only ones in the spacious house. He was standing beside her, watching her eat the porridge with a burning gaze. Yi Qian glanced at him without batting an eyelid. He lowered his head to eat the porridge with a slight smile. So Captain Xia was the one who made the porridge. He was standing there waiting for her to praise him. Yi Qian lowered her head and drank the porridge. Captain Xia, oh Captain Xia, you've teased me so many times in the past. Now it's my turn to tease you. After she finished the porridge, Yi Qian turned his head and said seriously, Captain Xia, are you hungry too? Do you want a bowl? He had been standing there for so long with a satisfied expression on his face. In the end, his little fox didn't even notice that she had finished the entire bowl of porridge. That's not possible. But from her expression, it seemed like she really didn't know. Did she think that Uncle Chin made the porridge? How does the porridge taste? He asked. Yi Qian nodded and said, Uncle Chin made it. It's not bad. He continued to maintain a serious expression so that the man in front of him wouldn't notice anything amiss. Major Xia, who had always been observant, believed him. He raised his hand to touch the top of her head and sighed. It wasn't easy for me to show off, but my future girlfriend didn't even notice. What a failure. It's okay. Captain Xia can continue to show off tomorrow morning. I'll definitely see. Yi Qian said and couldn't help but laugh. As soon as she laughed, Xia Jinyuan immediately reacted. What a sly little fox. She even tricked him. So you were just teasing me. Don't struggle. Be good and let me carry you back to your room. Xia Jinqiu raised her eyebrows and revealed a mischievous smile. Before Yi Qian got up, she hugged him with her long and strong arms and turned to walk into the room. This was a time to relax. Even though there were only the two of them in the house, and he was even carrying her into the room, Yi Qian did not feel any sense of danger. He smiled and praised, it's delicious and fragrant. It was comparable to a 5-star chef. Very good. I like it very much. You've worked hard. Captain Xia. I've been waiting for a word of praise from you. I feel like I've been waiting for an entire spring, summer, autumn, and winter. Now, it's time for interest. Xia Jinyuan gently placed Yi Qian on the bed. Then, he leaned over and placed his handsome face right in front of Yi Qian. He chuckled and said, interest, a kiss. Xia Jinyuan had experienced what it felt like to be starved for 7 days. He knew very well that even if he really drank a mouthful of hot porridge, his stomach would react with convulsions. She had been drinking the porridge with her head lowered just now to cover up the discomfort in her stomach. How could she go on like this? Yi Qian kissed him gently on the cheek. Then, her eyes sparkled as she looked gently at the man who was taking care of her. Thank you, Captain Xia. Captain Xia. I don't like this title. How about we change it? His kiss landed on her lips. His gentle voice was as light as the strings of a piano under the dim light of the table lamp. Good brother, what do you think? Mushy. Yi Qian closed his eyes. The corners of his mouth curled up as he said, Captain Xia, Captain Xia, Captain Xia, Captain Xia. His lips and teeth were full of sweetness. You disobedient little thing. Let's talk about it again next time. It was 2:30. After half an hour of messing around, it was time to rest. Xia Jinyuan kissed her forehead and got up. I have to take a shower too. I haven't showered for 3 days and 2 nights. Didn't you smell my sweat just now? Chapter 1136. If there was a smell, Yi Qian would have been able to smell it. Because there was no smell of sweat, there was only a light refreshing scent that filled his nose. Yi Qian joked, Captain Xia has his own body fragrance, how could there be a smell of sweat? Is that so? Xia Jinyuan lifted his hand to unbutton his cuffs and smiled. His handsome face revealed a lazy expression like a big cat. He smiled at Yi Qian and said, that's not bad, at least it won't send my girlfriend away. In the future, if I sneak in the middle of the night, I won't have to worry about the smell of sweat waking you up. When it came to being thick-skinned, Yi Qian had always been at a disadvantage. The image of him climbing through the window in the middle of the night flashed through his mind. Yi Qian couldn't help but blush. He hugged the quilt to his chest and said stiffly, I'm just being polite. Captain Xia is busy every day. Don't you know how dirty you are? It really wasn't dirty. After taking off the jacket, there was a white shirt underneath. There wasn't a trace of sweat on it. It was so white that she could almost smell the scent of soap after washing it. He raised his head slightly, revealing his sexy throat. His slender fingers began to unbutton the top button of his shirt. Following the movement of his fingers, Yi Qian, who had no interest in men, was mesmerized. He didn't know that the man's action of unbuttoning his shirt with his head raised was so beautiful. Because of his relaxed expression, there was a lazy and indifferent attitude in his bones. Combined with his elegant temperament, it became extremely sexy. At 24 years old, he was more charming and attractive than at 20 years old. Mature, sexy, cold, calm. Facing the iron-blooded tenderness of a soldier, Yi Qian felt as if he could hear his heart thumping loudly. The girl he had a crush on was staring at him with a slightly dazed gaze. Xia Jinyuan, who had sharp senses, raised the corner of his mouth a little. He had always been very confident in his body. Little Fox, who had been training with a group of male soldiers, had seen a lot of shirtless male soldiers. It was undeniable that her heart was a little jealous. She didn't look at him that much. Stop, stop, stop. You can go to the bathroom now. When Major Xia had unbuttoned the third button and was about to reveal a large portion of his chest, Yi Qian, who was determined not to be seduced by men, immediately stopped him. He pointed in the direction of the bathroom and said seriously, you can take it off inside. Put the dirty clothes in the laundry basket. If he didn't stop, she would be admiring him until he took off pants. Xia Jinyuan, who had the thought of showing off his figure in front of his girlfriend when necessary, couldn't go into the bathroom to take off his clothes. If he did, he wouldn't be Xia Jinyuan. His fingers stopped at the edge of the fourth button. As he slowly undid it, he said with an elegant smile, even if I take it off here, I can still put it in the basket. When I take off my pants later, I don't have to worry about my feet slipping and needing you to help me up. He was the only one who could come up with such an excuse. After he finished speaking, he looked up at the bed. Under the faint warm light, he could clearly see the shyness on Yi Qian's face. There wasn't a trace of impurity on her face. It was as clear as a mountain spring. He couldn't help but want to tease her, and dote on her. Yi Qian met his gaze and saw the uncontrollable laughter in his eyes. In the end, the room was filled with his laughter. Yi Qian was so embarrassed that he jumped up from the bed. He was addicted to taking it off. And he was taking so long. Fine, since he wanted to take it off for her to see, she would take it off for him. Chapter 1137. Hey, slow down, slow down. This bed is very elastic. Don't push your head against the ceiling. Xia Jinyuan noticed that her movements had suddenly become violent. His heart tightened, and he no longer had the time to tease her. He hurriedly hugged Yi Qian, who was still trying to jump off the bed. Everything was fine. Why did you suddenly? Yi Qian, who was in his arms, became violent for once. She grabbed his collar with both hands, and as he spoke, she valiantly tugged on his shirt. Yes, there was no need to undo the fourth button. She had already done it for him. Seeing how violent Yi Qian was, Xia Jinyuan suddenly fell silent. He originally wanted to ask, why did you suddenly become so naughty? But, wasn't she naughty? His entire shirt, starting from the middle button, was completely torn apart by her. The pearl-colored buttons fell to the floor and made a few crisp sounds. Xia Jinyuan, who was a little stunned, looked towards the floor and saw one of the buttons roll under the bed. Why did you suddenly become so naughty? Xia Jinyuan slowly finished what he wanted to say. He looked at Yi Qian with his deep eyes and said, you tore his shirt with your bare hands. That's a little fierce. Fortunately, she was wearing a shirt. If she was wearing a t-shirt, he would probably be able to see her violent side. The scene of Yi Qian tearing his t-shirt with her bare hands flashed across his mind. The 24-year-old major felt his nose itch a little. The scene was very exciting. Yi Qian's violent actions not only tore his shirt apart, but she also grabbed his collar and took it off his shoulders. She snorted and said, you don't have to take it off slowly for me to see. I'll take it off for you. Wasn't it just taking off his shirt? What was the big deal? She took it off for him. I've never taken off a man's shirt before. My technique is a little rusty, so I'm not very familiar with it. Yi Qian added. He wanted to strengthen his aura, but unexpectedly, Major Xia burst out laughing. Yi Qian, who had lowered his head, could clearly see the man's sexy chest rising and falling after he tore off his shirt. Every part of him exuded the wild charm of a man. It seemed that he was a little too aggressive, she thought silently. It seems that next time I have to prepare a few more shirts for you to tear. Why was the girl he liked so interesting? Raising an eyebrow, Jun Yen smiled wickedly. It just so happens that I've never taken off a woman's clothes before. My technique is also a little rusty, and my movements might be even more unfamiliar than yours. Little fox, don't blame me for being too slow when the time comes. When the same words came out of his mouth, Yi Qian, who was holding back his embarrassment, blushed so much that even his ears turned red. Very aggressive, but also very energetic. Why didn't I realize that you had such a unique side to you in the past? Xia Jinyuan truly loved the other side of her that she revealed from time to time. It was so real, and so true to herself. It would never be known to outsiders. He was the only one who knew the other side of the woman he loved. Just thinking about it made his heart fill with love. Yi Qian didn't want to listen to it anymore. After being aggressive, he regretted it a little. Hearing his shameless words again, the shy Yi Qian covered his mouth and glared at him. Xia Jinyuan, you're not allowed to say any more. Shut up. Even though his mouth was covered, he couldn't stop his laughter. His eyes, which were as deep as the ocean, were filled with a gentleness that could drown Yi Qian. He looked at her for a moment and said in a low voice, I won't say any more, I won't say any more. Chapter 1138. Yi Qian's thin lips moved gently in her palm. They were moist, warm and itchy. She felt as if she had been electrocuted. Yi Jian was so shocked that she quickly retracted her hand and said, "Go and take a shower. Don't mention what happened just now again." Why did she tear his clothes just now? But he didn't regret it. At least she saw that he was obviously in a daze. He didn't react for at least 30 seconds and was stunned by his own actions. "Since I'm a good person, why don't you take off my entire shirt?" With his shirt hanging from his shoulders, Xia Jinyuan continued to shamelessly discuss the fun of tearing clothes with your bare hands. His dark and deep eyes were like an ancient well, and he smiled at Yi Qian with a dark and bottomless gaze. "You're unfamiliar with the craft. Practice a few more times and you'll be able to master it one day." As he spoke, the corners of his lips curled into an ambiguous smile. He leaned close to Yi Jian's ear and whispered something softly. Yi Jian did not even think twice before biting his shoulder. "Xia Jinyuan, you hooligan. You're calling me a hooligan in your heart, aren't you? Little fox, when two people are in love with each other, it's not called being a hooligan. It should be called being in love with each other." Her bite was as light as a puppy's lick. She couldn't bear to let him feel pain. She bit him, and he said what he wanted to say in his heart. His cheek gently rubbed against her ear. Under the warm light, their intertwined figures rubbed against each other. Time seemed to have stopped, and the air was sweeter than honey. Xia Jinyuan was a man of grace, gentlemanly, and responsible. However, he also had a common problem with all men, domineering. But there was something different about his domineering nature. It wasn't the kind of domineering that meant what he said, but the kind that meant what he said. It made Yi Qian feel that his sincere domineering nature contained the happiness of being pampered and cared for. He had just said, "Man, there are too many people in his life, but the only one he can truly hold in his arms is his own woman. He doesn't know how to love her, but he will try his best to love her and let her know that he loves her. He will put his love into action." As a normal man, it's normal for him to have certain thoughts about the woman he loves. He hopes that one day, he can explore it with her, and he also hopes that she will accept it and not run away. The premise is that everything is based on her willingness. All along, Yi Qian felt that he wasn't someone who was easily moved, but after hearing this, he couldn't deny that he was very, very tempted. She loosened her mouth and rested her head on his shoulder. She mumbled, "Your muscles are so hard. There's a little taste of salt and meat." How much did he want to eat meat? Hugging Yi Jian, who was so skinny that she hurt his hand, he stopped talking about adults. He had no choice. The little fox in his arms was no longer the little girl he first met. She should know what an 18-year-old adult should know. Bear with it. If you really want to eat, I don't mind you taking a few bites of me. Be good and go back to bed. If you don't want to sleep, you can read a book. Let's talk after I take a shower. After sleeping for a few hours, Yi Qian didn't feel sleepy. They hadn't talked for a few months, so it was good to sit and chat. Xia Jinyuan also took a quick shower. 3 minutes later, he was wearing the same fitness shorts as Yi Qian. He walked over lazily, exuding a cool aura. "Turn on the light and read a book. The desk lamp is too dim, it hurts my eyes." Chapter 1139. I'm just looking through it. I don't plan on looking at it for long. After knowing each other for so long, Yi Qian could clearly feel that the topics of their conversation had changed drastically, and there was a natural intimacy between them. Looking at Xia Jinyuan, who was sitting next to her and emitting steam, Yi Qian smiled and said, "You'll smell better after taking a shower." It was just past May, and the temperature in the middle of the night was cool and comfortable. Both of them were in good physical condition, so they didn't need to cover themselves with a blanket. They leaned against the headboard with a pillow behind them and chatted in a low voice. After some sweet tenderness, they started to talk about business. From July to August, the Navy Commando team will undergo frogman training. The Major General has already applied to the Navy for you, and now we're just waiting for their reply. If there are no accidents, you'll have to leave immediately after the college entrance examination results come out. You'll have to undergo about 10 days of basic training first. Xia Jinyuan, who was talking about business, had a cold expression on his face. You've never experienced the Navy's training before. It'll be good for you to go and learn for a month. Navy frogman training. Yi Qian's eyes lit up when she heard this. She couldn't help but turn sideways. It sounds so mysterious. Is it a special force in the Navy? Pretty much, but we're used to calling it the commando team. The instructor in charge of this training is one of the top in the entire Navy. I've worked with him twice before. The first time I trained with him, I joined my current special force, and he joined the commando team. One had ambitions in the military, while the other had ambitions in the military. After half a year of working together, they each made their own mark. Xia Jinyuan smiled faintly when he talked about the past. He's an amazing commando. During the same period, I often competed with him. In the end, even the instructor was worried. There was such an amazing person. Why was he worried? Did you guys fight? Yi Qian's interest was piqued. It wasn't because there was such an amazing person, but because she saw Xia Jinyuan's expression of appreciation for the soldiers he trained with in the same period. In her mind, Captain Xia was amazing enough. She didn't expect there to be someone who was on the same level as him. Her eager expression made Xia Jinyuan raise his eyebrows. You want to see me fight with others? Then you want me to win? Or do you want me to lose? Yi Qian smiled. He wanted to see both. You can't help an outsider, little fox. Xia Jinyuan raised his hand and gently flicked her forehead. He laughed and said, the result you want to see is not there. After half a year of intensive training, I didn't lose, and he didn't lose either. It's a tie. Two strong soldiers walked together and were assigned to the same training team. One was wearing a white military uniform, while the other was wearing a dark green military uniform. This left a deep impression on the instructors who had trained them. He's a nice guy, but he doesn't like to talk much. I live in the same dormitory as him. I nod when I wake up in the morning, nod when I come back at night, nod when I wake up in the morning, nod when I come back at night, nod again when I wake up in the morning, nod again when I come back at night. One day, the instructor saw us like this and said, both of you have cervical spondylosis. I see you guys pulling your necks every day. At that time, the whole team laughed. Now that I think about it, I want to laugh too. Xia Jinyuan was not stingy with his praise for the strong soldiers in the same period. This was because Li Jinyan was indeed a soldier worthy of respect. Although the two of them were from different branches of the military, they had more or less heard about him. During the fire incident in the bay, he was the one who led his commando team into the sea, risking the danger of being burned to death to save countless people. Such a strong person who was not afraid of sacrificing himself could only be admired. Chapter 1140. Yi Qian, who was listening quietly, could feel that Xia Jinyuan really admired this person. She couldn't help but laugh. Then I can't say that I know you when I go over. Don't give me too much training. Oh right, what's his name? You'll definitely get it if you give him too much training. Xia Jinyuan chuckled. This little brat was really thoughtful. Was she afraid that Li Jinyan would take revenge on her? He didn't have any enmity with Li Jinyan. They only contacted each other once or twice a year, but they didn't have any grudges. Looking at her sparkling eyes and her expression that said, Captain Xia must have been beaten up by him. He didn't know whether to laugh or cry. I don't have any grudges with Demon King Lee. Training is training, but a soldier who doesn't fight for first place isn't considered a good soldier. We both fought for first place in training, so we have a good relationship in private. Yi Qian's eyes narrowed slightly. In her previous life, Yi Ying's mother-in-law was also surnamed Li. However, it was a secret who she married into. Even the villagers didn't know which family she married into to become an official's wife. She didn't pay attention to Yi Ying's in-laws. In her previous life, it was Yi Zhifan and Yi Ying who had harmed her. Li Jinyan is a perfectionist. Once he finds out that someone isn't up to par, or that someone is trying to get by with their wits, he won't show them any mercy. He'll immediately invite them out of his commando team. He studied at West Point for half a year, and he has a Western-style ruthlessness when dealing with people. Considering that Yi Qian would be joining Li Jinyan's team, Xia Jinyuan didn't notice the hint of gloom in Yi Qian's eyes. He picked out some classic examples that could reflect his personality. He treats everyone who joins his team equally, regardless of their status. It can be said that he has a very upright personality, and it's admirable. As he spoke, he raised his hands and rested them behind his head. His slender legs were lazily crossed with an innate elegance. His thighs would even lightly touch Yi Qian's feet from time to time. When Yi Qian glared at him, he immediately smiled and stopped. Last year, a soldier with some background joined his team. He said that he was the son of a military staff officer. That kid has some skills. He represented the country in boxing and won a silver medal. With a bit of ability and a decent background, it's hard to avoid being arrogant. On the first day, he went to the dormitory that he wasn't satisfied with. He said that he wasn't used to sharing a room with 4 people and requested for a separate room. At that time, Li Jinyan didn't say a word. He turned around and called the Navy headquarters. 2 hours later, the staff officer's son left the training camp. Everyone is equal. The same training, the same learning, no special privileges, no special treatment, no difference in status. Little Fox, after you go in, he'll add a rule that says there's no distinction between men and women. After talking so much about Li Jinyan, Yi Qian's curiosity was piqued by the contents of his training. He sounds like a good person with strong principles. Then isn't the content of his training quite harsh? Xia Jinyuan pondered for a moment before answering, it's harsher than the soldiers think. Every year, he'll select a few commandos from the thousands of people in the Navy, and only 10 or 20 will be left. If you train in his team, 1 month's training will be equivalent to 3 months of training. Learn well and build a solid foundation. It'll be more helpful for your future training. Xia Jinyuan didn't belittle Li Jinyan at all. He even made Yi Qian feel his admiration for him. He wasn't worried at all that praising another man in front of his girlfriend would damage his own image and raise others. Chapter 1141. A confident man was never afraid of being compared to others. Xia Jinyuan was such a man. He was confident, calm, and would never doubt Yi Qian's loyalty to love, let alone his own charm. As the night deepened, the low voices gradually disappeared. The lights went out, and the night was quiet. Everyone was sound asleep. Li Jinyan hadn't fallen asleep yet. The blue light from the screen illuminated his handsome and cold face, revealing a sharp and cold aura. He was still writing down the contents of the selection and training for the commandos. After countless revisions, he then arranged targeted training according to the abilities of the selected commandos. He didn't type quickly. Sometimes, he had to pause for a while before he could type another line. The risk of underwater training had always been much higher than that of training on land. Take the training of being tied up and thrown into the water as an example. There were often students who choked because they couldn't untie the ropes in time. There were even some students who suddenly fainted after holding their breath for 2 minutes. Wait a minute, all kinds of dangers could happen. Team members are in groups of 2 and are connected by a partner rope. Each person must carry 100 kilograms of equipment and swim 30 kilometers together. At the same time, they must. A line of words appeared on the computer screen. Just looking at it made one's scalp tingle. Wouldn't it take a day and a night to swim 30 kilometers with 100 kilograms of equipment? There was a knock on the door. Then, the Navy commander walked in. "You're not done yet." "Yes, I've finished the training for the Devil Week and the Foundation Week." "Please take a look." Looking up from the computer screen, Li Jinyan picked up the folder next to his hand and handed it over. "Seaweed sent a letter saying that this batch of soldiers for the primary selection wants me to practice with them. I plan to leave tomorrow afternoon, so we can practice together tonight." The Navy commander's hand that was about to take the folder froze. Then, he simply took it back. "You're doing the foundation training again." "I'm going, so of course I have to do it." "Please take a look." Li Jinyan pretended not to see the Navy commander's action and said indifferently, "Also, the Army wants to send people over. We'll talk about it when I come back." The Navy commander helplessly took the folder. After opening it, his furrowed brows loosened a little. He flipped to the back and sighed, "Jinyan, the other party is a girl. Shouldn't you soften your attitude a little? You're just a basic training knight. How can a girl's physical fitness catch up to a Marine? Moreover, she's from the Army, so I'm afraid her swimming skills are only average. Listen to my advice and adjust the content slightly." "Adjust it slightly." Li Jinyan smiled coldly and said indifferently, "Commander, I never give special treatment to anyone. Since she's here for training, she has to follow my instructions. Also, when the Army sees my training, it's still a question whether they'll send people over. The training content won't change. It's up to her whether she can persevere or not. I don't have any problems with it." This stubborn temper. Why was he so stubborn? The Navy commander glared at him. "You'll suffer sooner or later with that temper of yours. Jinyan, sometimes you need to be a little softer. Don't always act according to your own ideas." If it wasn't for his beloved general, he wouldn't even bother to say a word. His heart was tired. "Commander, you're thinking too much. I'm only targeting the training. The training can't be soft, and the enemy's artillery won't be soft either. I don't feel guilty about what I'm doing." There was no way he could continue writing tonight. Li Jinyan simply turned off the computer and stood up to speak to the Navy commander who was concerned about him. "It's getting late. You can go back and rest." Chapter 1142. Seeing this, the Navy commander let out a long sigh. "It's been hard on you, Jinyan. I know that it's normal for you to not give in. Only by being strict with yourself today will you be able to gallop on the battlefield in the future. The Storm Amphibious Frogmen Commando team has been established for less than a year. You've led your team members to many meritorious deeds. The generals of the 3 major warships are very satisfied with the results of your training. What you've done is worthy of the responsibility on your shoulders. Go and rest. I've noticed that you don't turn off the lights until 3 or 4 in the morning for the past few nights. You have to hurry up with your training, but you also have to take care of your own body." Li Jinyan, who had taken down his white navy cap from the coat rack, paused for a moment. He put on his military cap and looked at the commander with his cold and deep eyes. "This is my responsibility. I can't let it go. What I've done is my duty. It's about training. You don't have to persuade me anymore. There's no way to take half a step back. Moreover, you know best that our country's frogman training started late and lagged behind developed countries by a lot. Now, we can only catch up with the frogmen in developed countries by working hard. The Storm Amphibious Frogman Commando Team was a brand new and the youngest force in the country's armed forces system. It had been established for less than a year. Before this, the country didn't have a specially established naval commando team. For example, the Guangzhou military region had its own Frogman special forces that belonged to the Guangzhou military region. A brigade in the Southern Province military region also had one that belonged to the Southern Province military region. However, only Li Jinyan's Storm Amphibious Frogman Commando Team truly belonged to the country's navy. This team had been established for less than a year and was the youngest force in the country's armed forces system. All the members were handpicked from the country's navy and army. Their physical fitness, skills, thinking, style, willpower, and quality were all first class. With such a young naval commando team, if Li Jinyan, as the captain, didn't strictly control it and increase the difficulty of training, how could he bear the responsibility? How could he answer to the country and the people? Facts have proven that choosing him as the first captain of this young armed force commando team, the Marine leaders absolutely did not make a wrong choice. Although it has been established for less than a year, their combat strength is beyond the imagination of ordinary people. Coupled with the fact that their training places are all some deserted islands and corners, they have also become a strong mysterious force. It could be said that in terms of strength, the Navy Storm Commandos were on the same level as the mysterious Shuayu Special Forces. Both teams were the sharp blade of our country, and they were also the special forces that were hidden in the dark and not known by others. However, there were differences between the two units. First of all, the Snowfield Brigade was established at the end of the 80s, and it had been 10 years since then. On the other hand, the Storm Amphibious Frogman Assault Team was only established at the end of June last year. It hadn't even been a year since then. As the first captain of this unit, Li Jinyan shouldered a lot more pressure than Xia Jinyuan. Originally, he was a person who did not like to smile. Since he became the captain of the commando team, his sharp and cold handsome face became colder and colder, and his eyes became sharper. Standing in front of the Navy commander, he was full of momentum and killing intent. Also, I'm intentionally increasing the difficulty of the training. You should know what I'm trying to prevent. This is not a place where some high-ranking officials want their sons to gain military merits and get promoted. Military merits and military ranks are given to capable comrades. Commander, I won't let the brothers who have gone through life and death with me suffer. Chapter 1143. After he finished speaking, the Navy commander patted him heavily on the shoulder and said with relief, "Jinyan, you never let me down. Work hard. No matter what happens, we will support you. The 3 major warships will also support you. I will not interfere with Yi Qian's matters anymore. You are the captain, so you should have full authority to make arrangements. I will not have any objections." At this point, a trace of a smile finally appeared on Li Jinyan's face. It was very faint, like a small wave in the sea that quickly splashed and disappeared, but it was enough to dissolve the coldness in his handsome face. "You've always been supportive of my work. I understand." With a Navy commander who supported the progress of his work, he could avoid many external factors and make his work progress smoother and more orderly. "It's my duty to support you. Let's go back to the dormitory together. It's good that you go there tomorrow. This batch of recruits is much worse than last year. They can't even compare to the soldiers you trained during that period. I don't know if it's because all the good seedlings have been selected, but I always feel that they are too impetuous and not as good as the soldiers they used to be," the Navy commander said seriously. The lights in the corridor illuminated 2 figures in the same white military uniform until they disappeared at the top of the stairs. The wind blew and the waves hit. The sentries held their steel guns and straightened their backs. They watched the surroundings with eagle-like eyes and stood guard until dawn. A new day came with the rise of the sun. Xia Jinyuan, who had just finished his morning run, brought a bowl of piping hot porridge to Yi Qian, who had just finished washing up, and said seriously, "I didn't get to hear your praise in time last night. Remember to say it after you taste it." "I'll wait to hear it." Sometimes, the great Major Xia could be narrow-minded. Yi Qian pursed his lips and smiled. After he scooped a spoonful of porridge, he praised, "Not bad. The porridge is thick but not sticky. It's very fragrant." In order to make up for last night's lack of praise, Yi Qian drank the bowl of porridge for 10 minutes. 5 of those minutes were dedicated to praising Major Xia. In front of him, even if it was just a bowl of porridge, the smile on Yi Qian's face was more than ever. The kind of smile that came from the bottom of his heart was like the rising sun outside, bright and beautiful. In her previous life, Yi Qian was as quiet as an orchid. She was talented but failed to live up to her expectations. She rarely smiled. In this life, only Xia Jinyuan brought her endless joy and made her smile like a blooming flower. Xia Jinyuan looked at her smiling as she spoke. She was still optimistic without a trace of gloominess, and the darkness in his eyes gradually dissipated. He thought that he wouldn't have to worry about her training in the future and could really let go. Let her face it alone and adjust by herself. She wouldn't need his guidance or psychological guidance anymore. After going through so many trials and tribulations, his little fox was much more determined and mature than before. Her mental fortitude had also improved greatly, and she no longer had the hesitation she had when facing the sacrifice of her comrades. At 6:30 in the morning, Yi Qian went back to her room to pack the revision books she brought to school today. Xia Jinyuan cleaned up the dishes. After he finished cooking in the kitchen and returned to his room, he saw her standing in front of her luggage. Her side profile was slightly dark and she looked slightly serious. Yi Qian heard footsteps and turned around. She saw the tall figure walking towards her. She pursed her lips and bent down to take out a yellow training uniform from her luggage. "Captain Xia, where did you rush over from?" Looking at the unzipped luggage from last night, Xia Jinyuan smiled casually and said, "I wasn't in a hurry. I just finished my work and came over. I didn't deliberately rush over." Chapter 1144. With that said, Xia Jinyuan reached out to take back the training uniform that he had used to climb the landslide. However, Ji Yunshu's hand flashed away, preventing him from taking it back. "You were in a hurry, and you didn't even take a car. You..." Yi Qian pointed at the 2 obvious mud marks on his knees. Although the corners of her mouth were pressed tightly together, her eyes were slightly red. "Where did you come from? How did you climb all the way?" If he had been training to climb, there would have been marks on the knees of his pants and the elbows of his sleeves. However, Yi Qian only saw the marks on his pants and not the elbows of his clothes. However, there was some mud on his sleeves, so she understood everything. It was difficult to hide something like this from her. Xia Jinyuan couldn't bear to see her cry for him. He used his thumb to gently wipe away the tears at the corners of her eyes and gently explained, "When I came out, there was a landslide and the road was blocked. I wanted to catch the last bus into the city, so I had to climb over the landslide. Be good, don't cry. We often encounter this kind of thing, so don't take it to heart. Just treat it as my field training. When you cry, I feel even worse in my heart. I originally wanted to see you smile and listen to your voice, but I didn't expect that I would make you cry." The last thing he wanted to see was her tears. Drop by drop, they smashed into his heart like marbles. His handsome face was gentle as he continuously coaxed her. His mellow voice carried a hint of pity. "Don't cry. It's just climbing a landslide. Look at how sad you are." Yi Qian didn't know why she suddenly couldn't help but cry. She originally wanted to restrain herself, but when she heard his explanation, her heart suddenly tumbled, and her tears fell uncontrollably. Someone had traveled thousands of miles, even if it meant crawling, just to see her. Even though she had lived 2 lives and didn't know anything about sex, she understood that he really treated her differently. He really put her in his heart and gave her a headache. He loved her in a way that she could accept and guided her growth. No matter how strong her personality was, she had been too lonely in her previous life. Now that there was such a person in this life, she felt a warmth that she had never felt before. It was so warm that her heart was burning, so warm that tears suddenly flowed down her cheeks. Xia Jinyuan was a little flustered. He really didn't know why she was crying. In all these years, he had only heard her cry twice. The first time was when her comrades sacrificed themselves, and the second time was right now. He really didn't expect her to cry like this. Just because he had climbed over a landslide, it had caused her to tear up in bunches. Xia Jinyuan was a natural at comforting others. He spoke in a low voice and did not repeat a single sentence. "I wouldn't be standing in front of you if something happened to me. I just wanted to see if you were okay, but I ended up making you cry. Little fox, you have to forgive me this once." He was always thinking for her, but he never considered his own hardships. Yi Qian, whose nose was slightly stuffy, held the hand that was wiping her tears. She looked up at the man whose handsome face was filled with tenderness. "Captain Xia, I will definitely take good care of myself. Just like how you take care of me, I will take good care of myself. You don't have to appear every time when my training is at its toughest. I know that you care about me a lot and are worried about me, but you really don't have to rush over every time when my training ends. I will grow as fast as possible and won't let you worry about me anymore." Yi Qian looked at the man who was crying because of her with his clear eyes. His deep, dark eyes were filled with reluctance. She tiptoed and gently planted a kiss on his chin. "You're heartbroken that I traveled thousands of miles to come here. Similarly, I'm heartbroken that you've worked so hard for me." Chapter 11:45. You were in such a hurry yesterday, yet you were still wearing a white shirt. You clearly put away your dirty clothes in advance and purposely put them on because you didn't want me to worry. Since you know that I would be worried, don't tire yourself out like this in the future, okay? In order to not tire Xia Jinyuan out again, Yi Qian even resorted to seducing him with her beauty. She paused after every sentence, then kissed him gently on the chin. She kissed him back and forth, whispering sweet words to him in a soft voice. It was early in the morning, but the young major's heart was already racing. His long arms wrapped around her slender waist. Xia Jinyuan kissed the little mouth that was messing with his emotions. He nibbled on her soft lips and sucked deeply. Sometimes he was gentle and sometimes he was domineering. Her breaths were intertwined with his. Their breaths were so intertwined that they could no longer tell who was who. The sudden deep breath made Yi Qian's body tremble slightly. Her trembling hands wrapped around his muscular waist, she stood on her heels and used her lips and tongue to kiss the man who gave her a sense of security and love. Her active response made Xia Jinyuan very happy. At the same time, he heaved a sigh of relief. At least she didn't cry anymore. People always said that women were made of water. He didn't believe it at first, but now he really believed it. His little fox, who didn't even blink when she saw blood, suddenly burst into tears. Her tears fell like strings, and he was stunned for a few seconds. Last time, he was prepared when she cried for her comrades who had sacrificed themselves. This time, she cried because she had climbed down the slope. He really didn't have any time to prepare, and it was completely out of his expectations. Their relationship had been progressing well ever since the love letter, but they were still separated more than they were together, so they lacked the intimate interaction between lovers. If they really wanted to interact with each other, both of them were the type of people who could restrain themselves. They wouldn't let anything happen to them. After the kiss, the two of them pressed their foreheads against each other and quickly adjusted their breathing. Xia Jinyuan was tall, so when he lowered his head, he could see Yi Qian's well-developed chest rising and falling right in front of his eyes. He thought to himself, "This is really going to kill me." Then he closed his eyes and stopped looking at the scene that was going to kill him. Yi Qian, who exercised all year round, not only did she develop well, her body proportions were also perfect. Her legs were long and slender, her waist was slender, and her breasts were firm. Coupled with her imposing manner, she attracted the attention of boys wherever she went. When Xia Jinyuan walked her to the back door of the provincial first high school, she saw several boys looking at her. However, they didn't look like they were in love with her. Instead, they looked confused. It's only been 7 days. How did Yi Qian become so thin? Also, who was the man beside her? He had never seen it before. When another two boys glanced over again, Major Xia slightly straightened his expression and swept his gaze over them. Without doing anything, he killed the two boys and made them leave in a panic. Let's go, it's so scary. Who's that man? Why did Yi Qian lose so much weight? The two boys from grade 2 class 2 whispered to each other as they walked quickly. Yi Qian was definitely a celebrity in the provincial first high school. There wasn't a student from grade 1 to grade 3 who didn't know her. It couldn't be helped. Every year at the opening ceremony, she would go on stage as the student representative. The teachers of each class would often say to their students, "Look at your senior, Yi Qian. Look at your senior, Yi Qian. Look at Yi Qian from grade 3 class 1. Look at her, look at her. Her grades are good enough, right? She's still so hardworking." Chapter 1146. Look at you, your grades are a mess, yet you're still not working hard. Do you think you're good? If you're really good, learn from Yi Qian. If you're half as good as her, I won't even care if you sleep in class. In the second year of high school, Yi Qian had always been compared to others. She had to compete with them every day without fail. Under such circumstances, it would be strange if someone didn't recognize her. Because they recognized her, when they saw a young man with a strong aura beside her, their gazes lingered on her longer than usual. Who's that man? His gaze is so scary. He must be Yi Qian's brother. They look a little alike. The way they walk and their expressions are similar. They look like siblings. Are you crazy? Yi Qian doesn't have a brother. She's the only one left at home. How can he be her brother? But they do look a little alike. Cousin. Distant relative. 7:20 in the morning was the peak time for school. There were many people at the front gate and back gate. Students who passed by would usually pay attention to Yi Qian, and some would even come over to greet her. However, none of them did that today. They all looked at her silently and then left. Why did she lose so much weight? Is she sick? She did lose weight, but she doesn't look like she's sick. She's in good spirits. Who's the person beside her? He's quite handsome, but his gaze is a little scary. I don't dare to look at him too much. Some of the whispers reached their ears clearly, while others were muffled and couldn't be heard clearly. Even if they reached his ears, it didn't affect Xia Jinyuan. He smiled and walked elegantly to school with Yi Qian. Everyone says you've lost weight. I'm afraid they think you've lost weight because of a scary man like me. Am I scary? I don't think so. I look decent. It was the first time Xia Jinyuan was accompanying his future girlfriend to school. The corners of his mouth were raised high. Although they weren't holding hands, he could at least show his face in front of the provincial first high school students to make his presence felt. Although his identity hadn't been recognized, it was good to be able to walk in front of her classmates. Don't think too much, Captain Xia. They looked at me first, then you. You, take a second look. When he said that he wanted to send her to school, he already knew that there would definitely be many students sizing her up. As a matter of fact, he didn't know how many gazes he received along the way. Yi Qian said with a smile. He nodded at a girl who was smiling at him and politely said, "Good morning." Then he continued to speak to Xia Jinyuan, "But you're right about one thing. I'm afraid they really think that I've lost weight because of you." He returned to the team in the afternoon. The distance from the residential area to the campus was less than 400 meters. Walking slowly for 10 minutes became the time they spent together. She wanted to spend more time with him, even if they were seen by their classmates. In the past, she was afraid that he would be influenced by an underage student because of his identity as a soldier. Now that she was 18 years old, what did she have to be afraid of? Hurry up and go. I'll visit you again when I'm free. Xia Jinyuan walked Yi Qian all the way to the back gate of the school. He was wearing a white short-sleeved shirt and black trousers. He stood by the side, looking handsome and elegant. His eyes contained a gentle smile as he watched Yi Qian enter the school. The boys would look at Yi Qian more often, while the girls would secretly look at Xia Jinyuan more often. He stood tall and slender among the students. His handsome face contained a deep and charming smile. Even if he only smiled at Yi Qian, it still made the hearts of the girls who walked past him palpitate. Chapter 1147. Even though she didn't say a word, she couldn't help but blush when she walked past him. Yi Qian, who had already entered the school, smirked when he saw this. So many people were looking at him. Fine, this was the first time she felt a little jealous. Captain Xia. Yi Qian walked up to him and gestured for him to lower his head with a smile. Then, under everyone's gaze, Yi Qian suddenly kissed Major Xia, who was bending down with his head lowered. Gasps could be heard all around. Both the boys and girls watched as the good student of their school, Yi Jian, kissed a man's face. I'm going to school. See you next time, my good brother. After the kiss, Yi Qian looked at Major Xia, who was stunned by his actions, and felt even better. He waved at him, and amidst the gasps, Yi Qian turned around and walked into the school gate without any pressure. Xia Jinyuan was really dumbfounded. Just a second ago, he was still thinking that his identity could not be exposed. The next second, his little fox, who never acted according to common sense, kissed him. She kissed him in front of at least 30 students. After the kiss, she even called him good brother to confuse the public. The major touched the cheek that had been kissed, and the corners of her mouth curled up even higher. She even smiled at the few male students who were staring at her in horror. With a noble temperament, she elegantly left the school through the back door. That's right, his little fox finally admitted his identity. After 4 years of waiting, he finally saw the light of day. Ah! Breaking news. Yi Qian just kissed a boy at the back of the school gate. It was absolutely true. Countless students saw it with their own eyes. That's right. I'm not lying to you. It really happened. She really kissed a guy. That guy was so handsome and had such a strong aura. He was said to be Yi Qian's older brother. They did look a little alike, but they didn't know if he was her older brother. Even before the morning self-study period, news of Yi Qian kissing a guy spread like wildfire. Instantly, the classrooms of every grade were filled with gasps of disbelief. That's impossible. She really kissed him. It can't be. You really saw it. Fuck. Really? The goddess in our hearts really kissed a man. What does he look like? Handsome. Ugly. Damn, is he that handsome? It can't be. And it's very high. There was no Yi Qian in the class, so he could only ask. Meanwhile, some of the grade 12 class 1 students were staring at Yi Qian. Their eyes were like searchlights, trying to find some clues from her face. This time, Enchanting did not hesitate to take the lead. She squeezed onto the same stool as Yi Qian and said with a worried look, "There are only 40 days left until the college entrance exam. Yi Qian, why are you kissing a man? If you really want to kiss me, you have to do it in secret. Why did you kiss me in public? You have to pay attention to your image, okay? You have to pay attention to your influence. Let me tell you, the whole school knows about it now, everyone knows about it. Even teacher wants to have a heart-to-heart talk with you. Just wait, I'll definitely have a heart-to-heart talk with you later." The girl who was listening by the side was extremely anxious. Why didn't she get to the point? She kept shushing her and said, "Are you in a relationship? What does that guy do? Where is he from? When did you date? Justin, get to the point, get to the point." Damn, she was asking all the point. And Justin turned her head to glare at the girl who was urging her and said, "When did you date? Why is there no news at all? Who is that guy? Is he reliable? What does he do? Do you even know about it?" Chapter 1148. After she asked the question, all the students held their breaths and waited for Yi Qian to answer calmly. Then, someone rushed into the classroom like a gust of wind and shouted, "Holy shit, I just heard someone say that Yi Qian kissed a man who was so handsome that he angered both men and gods. She even took the initiative to kiss him. Do any of you know?" The classroom was very quiet, but the boy's voice was exceptionally loud. The students who were waiting for Yi Qian's answer turned to glare at the boy who came late. All the students sitting in the classroom knew. "You're the only one who knows. So handsome that he angered both men and gods." Yi Qian laughed and pondered for a while before saying, "Not so handsome that he angered both men and gods. But, handsome, he is indeed a little handsome." And Justin rubbed her forehead and forced a smile. She asked, "Jane Eyre, you're focusing on the wrong thing. Can you answer me a little? You dared to run a red light at a critical moment. Aren't you afraid of being punished?" Everyone was only concerned about who Yi Qian kissed, but Justin's focus was completely different. She was afraid that something would happen to Yi Qian, and at this time, something would happen to him. "No, don't worry." Yi Qian comforted her and smiled. "I'll tell you who he is in the future. It's a little inconvenient now. But I can tell you that he is indeed someone who is very close to me. Our relationship is far from what you have seen. Everyone's curiosity can be quelled. It was just a normal kiss. Don't tell me that the couples in class don't know what a normal kiss is. This is what it is." The few couples in the class kissed normally. Yi Qian just didn't say it out loud. The students of grade 12 class 1 immediately understood. A few boys screamed and said, "She's already taken. There's no hope for all of them. Go, 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 turn your grief into strength and learn." The whole class burst into laughter. If they were to talk about it, they wouldn't be surprised. It was just a small matter. Who didn't have a crush on someone? Who didn't fantasize about kissing someone in their heart? As for Yi Qian, his grades were at the forefront, and his actions were also at the forefront. They couldn't compare. Are you sure? Are you sure? The students dispersed, but Enchanting didn't leave. She said softly, "You always have your own way of doing things. If you say it's fine, then it's fine." Oh, damn, I was scared to death just now. I was just getting breakfast when I heard a bunch of people talking about how Yi Qian kissed a man. A very, very handsome man. How handsome. And Enchanting had always believed in Yi Qian. When she said that she was fine, her worries were immediately swept away. She giggled and asked, "There's only one handsome man I've ever seen, and that's the handsome military officer who taught us about precautionary measures in junior high." TSK, that's what I call handsome. He's so handsome that I'm drooling. As she spoke, she pretended to wipe the corner of her mouth. I'm drooling all over the floor. She still remembered. Yi Qian smiled meaningfully and said, "Yes, he is. Next time, I'll bring you to meet him." No way, he's really that handsome. Okay, bring me to meet him. Bring me to meet him. And Enchanting immediately nodded. Then she touched Yi Qian's arm and frowned as she stared at her wrist. What happened? You've lost so much weight in 7 days. Where did you go? I went to do something. I didn't eat much. It's fine. I'll be fine after a few days. Just then, the morning self-study bell rang. Yi Qian gestured for her to quickly return to her seat. I'll be fine here. It won't affect anything. Hurry back to your seat. Chapter 1149. Since Yi Qian dared to kiss him, she was not afraid that something would happen. Moreover, she did not do anything bad. What impact could it have? Affect her studies? No. Even if she went home and rested until the day of the college entrance exam, it would not affect her studies. Affect her classmates? She did not date anyone in school, nor did she go around talking about who she dated. What impact could it have? The teachers naturally knew about it. How could they not know about it when the entire school knew about it? The school doesn't have to worry about this. I know who that man is. He is someone who has known Yi Qian for many years. Principal Chow smiled at the worried teacher Tong. You don't have to mention it or worry about it. It won't affect Yi Qian's exams. Principal Chow was not surprised at all when he heard the news. He had long noticed that Major Xia treated Yi Qian differently. Now that Yi Qian had turned 18, there was some progress in their relationship. The two of them were already restraining themselves. If she could restrain herself from falling in love, why would she be afraid of anything else? There was no need to worry at all. Nothing would happen. Since the principal had said so, Teacher Tong did not look for Yi Qian to have a heart-to-heart talk. The school did not intervene. The incident of Yi Qian kissing a man faded away on the 3rd day with the arrival of the midterm exams. The midterm exams were for the 1st to 2nd year of high school. The 3rd year of high school was a mock college entrance exam. The entire school was quiet. Only the sound of writing could be heard in the classroom. Old Madame Yi stood at the school gate and looked at the deserted campus. She said to Yi Jifan, who had accompanied her, "Jifan, ask the security guard when the students will be dismissed. Also, ask around where Yi Qian's form teacher is. I'll go talk to her first." She was quite capable. She even managed to get into the provincial No. 1 middle school. But she was too disobedient. Yi Jifan had always been good at pretending. When he heard this, he smiled and said, "Okay, then you rest first. I'll go ask around." After 2 minutes, he came back. What a coincidence. It's the midterm exams. I asked the security guard to call Miss Jian's form teacher. We can only go in when she arrives. Mom, what kind of lousy school is this? Don't you have any respect for your elders? Yi Xiang, who was dressed in bright red, frowned and said in disgust, Lei and Qingqing should go to an elite school. Mom, I don't like this kind of place. Yi Jifan glanced at her and said calmly, being able to enter the provincial first high school is equivalent to having 1 foot in the door of a university. Whether Lei and Qingqing can enter is still unknown. Here, it mainly depends on the results. What do you mean by looking at the results? Donate 100 to 200,000 yuan to their school, and my 2 sons can enter whenever they want. They can even choose their teachers. Yi Xiang rolled her eyes at her brother and curled her lips in disdain. Besides, I'm going to send them abroad to further their studies. Who asked them to stay in the country? Yao Zhu and I are even considering becoming American citizens. Old Madam Yi did not like her daughter's exaggeration and said unhappily, "Don't talk about things that have no basis in reality. The province's #1 middle school is a century-old school. It's not a school you can enter just because you want to. Also, don't keep talking about what school you want to join. I don't like to hear that." Ever since Sun Yaozu's identity was cleared, old Madam Yi clearly felt that her daughter and son-in-law did not like to listen to her. But she had no choice and could only accept it. But that did not mean that she could not do anything. She still had to deal with Yi Qian's matter. One did not want Yi Qian to ride on her daughter's head, the other did not want Yi Qian to stand out. Both of them wanted to get what they wanted, so they still had to rely on her at crucial times. Chapter 1150. The whole school was in the middle of a midterm exam. Even if the school guard connected the phone to the teacher's office, Teacher Tong could only come out after she was done invigilating the exam. The weather in May was not too hot. Sitting under the shade of a tree and chatting for 10 to 20 minutes could pass in the blink of an eye. However, Yi Xiang had no intention of chatting at all. After standing for less than 5 minutes, she said impatiently, "Why hasn't she come out yet? Brother, hurry her up. What is she doing? We've been waiting for so long and there's still no sign of her." She was standing outside the school like a fool. She thought that her family valued that wretched girl a lot. Xiang, go back to the car and wait. Don't walk around in front of me. You're making me dizzy. Seeing that her daughter was so impatient, old Madam Yi asked her to go back to the car so that she would not leave a bad impression on the teacher. She also wanted to play the family card in front of the teacher. She wanted to let the teacher know that it was not that the family could not tolerate Yi Qian, but that the girl was too wild and could not tolerate the family. She wanted to control the teacher's attitude first and then let the teacher lecture Yi Qian. She wanted to see if she knew how to respect the teacher and whether she had any sense of propriety and shame. Old Madam Yi was definitely an expert in handling family matters. After learning about Yi Qian from Yi Jifan, she immediately decided not to go to Yi Qian directly. She would go to the teacher first and ask the teacher to stand on her family's side. When the time was right, she would wipe away a few drops of tears and cry. She did not believe that the girl could escape unscathed. In terms of success, Yi Jifan was definitely skilled in politics. However, he was not half as good as old Madam Yi when it came to handling family matters. As for Yi Xiang, needless to say, she had not learned anything at all. She believed that there was nothing in the world that could not be solved with money. Yi Xiang really went back to her imported red BMW. Old Madame Yi secretly frowned as she watched her leave. This was also the reason why she did not want to fall out with Yi Jifan. With a brother who was an official protecting her, Sun Yaozu would have some misgivings. Jifan, your sister has a straightforward personality. As her brother, you should teach her more in the future. I'm old, and I can't care so much about your matters. In the future, your sister can only rely on you. I hope you'll take good care of your sister on account of how well I've treated you all these years. When Lei Lei and Qingqing grow up, your sister will have someone to rely on in her next life. Old Madame Yi had always doted on her own daughter. Now that she was old, seeing that her daughter couldn't keep her cool, she was afraid that she wouldn't be able to control Sun Yaozu in the future. When the time came, she would divorce and become an abandoned woman. After returning to the southern province for so long, this was the first time old Madame Yi had really put down her old face and begged her adopted son to take care of her for her sake. It could be seen that she no longer trusted her son-in-law, Sun Yaozu. For the sake of his daughter, he was willing to throw away his pride. However, Yi Jifan smiled faintly. Mom, you're worried that Ji Xiang won't be able to protect her, but why can't I see that you're worried that no one will protect Yingying in the future? Mom, don't you think the world is still fair? Your daughter doesn't have anyone to protect her, and mine doesn't either. It's really fair. His words made old Madame Ye's eyelids twitch. That matter. She was indeed a little too cruel. She was also a little too young back then. She was afraid that her second daughter-in-law would get pregnant with a boy and take away the Yi family's assets. You still blame me in the end. I know. Old Madame Yi let out a long sigh. Her youthful spirit instantly withered with that sigh. She suddenly felt that she had aged a lot. Chapter 1151. In the face of old Madame Ye's remorse, Yi Jifan's expression was very calm. More than 10 years had passed, and the things that made him so angry that he wanted to kill someone were now over. His daughter Yi Ying's studies were good and she was ambitious. If she really had a son, it might not be as good as a daughter. He said it just to provoke old Madame Yi. Old Madame Yi didn't know that he only wanted to provoke her. For her daughter to have a backer in the future, no matter how angry she was, she had to suppress it. What happened back then was my fault. Jifan, if you want to blame someone, blame me. It has nothing to do with your sister. Mom knows that she was wrong. Now, I can only do my best to make up for what I owe you. If you really can't let it go, then blame this old fart. Now that he saw that she had something to ask of him, he started to put on airs in front of her. Endure, she could only endure. Who knew that the seed she brought back from the side branch would be so promising? Look at what you're saying. You're my mother. How could I blame you? All right, let's not talk about the past. Yi Jifan stopped talking about it. When old Madame Yi said, now, I just want to make it up to you like back then. Her meaning was very clear. That year, when he found out that his wife had been sterilized, he went to find old Madame Yi the night he came back. That day, many things happened one after another. It was also that night that he found out that he wasn't old Madame Ye's biological son. The reason why she didn't want her wife to have a second child was very simple. She didn't want her daughter-in-law, who had no blood relations with her, to have another boy. In order to suppress the matter, old Madame Yi proposed to split Sun Shuoqing's pension into 2 parts. One for him, and the other for Yi Jixiang. As for the jade pendant, she could pretend that she didn't see it. At the same time, she would leave the village with Yi Jixiang and not interfere with anything, including the election of village officials. As for him, he would no longer pursue old Madame Ye's responsibility and would no longer think about having a boy. At the same time, he would use the jade pendant as a condition to watch over Yi Qian. He could give her food, but he definitely couldn't let her become a talent. After so many years of twists and turns, the only thing that could not be allowed to happen was the matter of Yi Qian becoming a talent. However, there was still one thing that he didn't understand back then. Yi Jifan thought about it and asked directly, "Big brother shouldn't be uncle's son, right? Back then, which family did you send uncle's son to?" This question made old Madame Ye's face darken. "Jifan, this wasn't part of our deal. Your uncle's son is Yi Qian's father. Something happened to him and he died outside." Yi Jifan's expression darkened slightly. He smiled and said, "Don't be angry. I only asked because I heard that IQ is hereditary. I thought that Yi Qian was so good at studying. Big brother doesn't have such a high IQ. Sister-in-law is smart, but she's not as smart as Yi Qian. Also, don't you think it's strange that Yi Qian doesn't look like big brother at all? He looks 60% like sister-in-law, but I don't know who he got the other 40% from." Old Madame Ye's face was not only dark, but also cold. "That's why before I left the village, I repeatedly reminded you to watch over that damned girl. You can't let her have the chance to become a talent." As she spoke, her voice was tense and filled with disgust. "Your sister-in-law married Yi Xinfan for less than a month and said that she had a child. Then, the child was born before a month. She was obviously unclean before she married him, bringing someone else's bastard child into our Yi family." Chapter 1152. Yi Xinfan, Yi Qian's father, was an honest villager. When he was young, Yi Jifan had never been afraid of his big brother. Now that he knew something he didn't know, Yi Jifan nodded and said without a trace of surprise, "No wonder the little girl didn't follow big brother. She's not big brother's child. She didn't look like Yi Qian, she didn't have the same IQ, and she didn't have the same way of doing things. It made sense that she wasn't big brother's child." "What about big uncle's son?" The elders in the village said that when Big Aunt came back with Big Uncle, the whole village was shocked. Even the way she walked and spoke was like a fairy. They even said that she was so beautiful that a notorious villain in town wanted to take her for himself. Yi Jifan looked at old Madame Yi and found that her eyelids were drooping, as if she didn't want him to see the expression in her eyes. It seemed that old Madame Yi had some misgivings about Big Uncle's family and his son. Big Aunt was an outsider. When she came back with Big Uncle, even the way she walked and spoke was like a fairy. This meant that Big Aunt was very elegant back then. To be able to raise such a beautiful and elegant daughter in that era, it was definitely not something an ordinary family could raise. Since Big Aunt had an extraordinary background, why did she come back with Big Uncle? Also, that era was extremely chaotic. Fight the landlord, fight the capitalists. Many rich families married their daughters off to 3 generations of poor farmers. Old Madame Yi, for example, married into the family. Could it be that Big Aunt was the same? An outsider following his uncle to a poor mountain village. Yi Jifan couldn't help but narrow his eyes as he thought about it. He had always suspected that there was someone behind Yi Qian. Could it be that Big Aunt's family found her and took Yi Qian as Big Aunt's granddaughter and raised her in secret? It wasn't impossible. Beside him, old Madame Yi, who was gradually calming down, said, "I raised your big brother for a while, so I have some feelings for him. If that little girl really is his child, I don't need you to raise her." His face lost some of its gloominess, leaving behind only disgust. "Only Sun Xueqing knows whose child that wretched girl is." "Mom, about Auntie." Yi Jifan still wanted to ask about the past, but the school bell rang, signaling the end of the first exam. Old Madame Yi directly interrupted him. "The exam is over. Go and urge the school guard to call the teacher again." It was obvious that old Madame Yi did not want to talk about her uncle's family at all. Yi Jifan felt that he had found a clue to find out who was behind Yi Qian, but he did not intend to tell old Madame Yi. When Teacher Tong returned to the office with the test papers, an invigilator who had just finished class said, "Teacher Tong, Yi Qian's grandmother from your class is outside the school. She said she has something to discuss with you." Yi Qian's grandmother. There was a trace of surprise on Teacher Tong's face. Yi Qian had a grandma. After thanking the teacher for informing her, Teacher Tong went directly to the school gate. Through the school gate, she saw an old woman wearing a modified Republic of China costume standing outside. Beside her was a woman in a red dress. Even from a distance, she could see that she was very elegant. As for the person on the right of the old woman, Teacher Tong could not help but tense up. Yi Ying's father was now a cadre in the provincial government. "You must be my granddaughter's form teacher, Teacher Tong." Old Madame Ye's round face smiled amiably. She greeted her with a kind expression. "Teacher Tong, thank you for making the trip. I am Yi Qian's grandmother. I haven't seen my granddaughter for a long time and I miss her very much. Sigh, I just wanted to come and see if she was doing well." Chapter 1153. As she spoke, she raised her hand to wipe the tears from the corners of her eyes. Teacher Tong saw that this elegant old lady was using a silk handkerchief to wipe her tears. She then looked at the old lady's clothes. There was not a single wrinkle on the old lady's clothes. There were delicate flowers embroidered on the sleeves. She wore a navy blue pleated dress that was long enough to reveal the toes of her shoes. As she looked down, Teacher Tong realized that the old lady was even wearing embroidered shoes. She was obviously rich. Such a rich grandmother coming to her door. Teacher Tong's heart skipped a beat. She maintained her composure and said politely, "You're too kind. As far as I know, Yi Qian is an orphan." Before the second year of the Lunar New Year, she had been living with Mr. Yi. As for her grandmother, "I'm sorry, old madam, I've never heard of her." "Teacher Tong, can we talk inside the school? There are some things that can't be explained clearly while standing." Old Madam Yi could tell that the teacher was protecting Yi Qian. Well, that brat's grades were not bad. Teachers would always protect good students. Yi Jifan said, "Teacher Tong, I miss my granddaughter. I came all the way here just to see Yi Qian. If you think there's a problem, you can ask me and verify if my mother is Yi Qian's grandmother. How about that?" Teacher Tong could not help but laugh. "Mr. Yi, you're exaggerating. I don't need to verify anything. It's just a routine understanding. As teachers, we have the responsibility to protect the safety of our students." She really couldn't believe that such a dignified grandmother would suddenly appear. How could she not be suspicious? "Teacher Tong, are you afraid that we'll kidnap Yi Qian or something? My mother and I sat in the car for more than 10 hours just to see Yi Qian." "What, is your teacher going to stop a grandmother from seeing her granddaughter? You're being too nosy." Yi Zhixiang's tone was particularly aggressive. Teacher Tong said in a low voice, "Madam, I'm a teacher. I have my responsibilities. Please be more polite." "Thank you." Yi Zhixiang's face turned red, then white. If it wasn't for old Madame Ye's words, she probably would have gotten serious with Miss Tong. "Teacher Tong, I have also been waiting outside for half an hour. If you have doubts, it means that you are a teacher and truly care about my granddaughter." Old Madame Yi once again used the silk handkerchief in her hand to wipe the corners of her eyes. Her voice was choked with sobs as she said, "This child has had a hard life, but it's all thanks to you. With a good person like you taking care of her, she grew up smoothly. Thank you so much. Thank you for taking care of my granddaughter." Thank you, thank you." Seeing an old woman apologizing, crying, and thanking her from time to time, Teacher Tong, who was a little vigilant, finally invited the three of them to her office. "Yi Qian still has an exam later, so it's not convenient for me to bring you to see her. Let's go to the principal's office first and wait for her to finish her exam before we call her over." Teacher Tong had always been cautious when it came to Yi Qian. Now that an old lady had suddenly appeared and was even brought here by Yi Ying's father, Teacher Tong felt uncomfortable whenever she thought about how Yi Ying had treated Yi Qian in school. She had to let Principal Chow know and let him come out to greet her. Principal Chow was also surprised by old Madame Ye's arrival. He had never heard of Yi Qian having a grandmother. While pouring water, he secretly said to Teacher Tong, "Go and call old Chen over. Tell him that Yi Qian's grandmother is here." You're tuning in to the LoveLore Library YouTube channel. We're so grateful for your support, and don't forget to subscribe to join us on this incredible journey through captivating stories. Your generosity through donations truly makes a world of difference, as it's the primary source of revenue that allows me to expand and enhance this channel for you. Thank you from the bottom of my heart for being a part of this adventure.